Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1. Blood Bridge, Journey to the Realm of Death. I clearly remember the first time I heard about the Blood Bridge. It was a dark evening when I was a child living in the small town of Hickory Grove, Ohio. My mother told me the story in the dim light of the kitchen as the wind whistled through the narrow window cracks, making strange sounds that I could have sworn were whispers. That bridge. It's not an ordinary bridge, my mother said, her voice low and filled with worry. It connects two villages, but it was abandoned long ago after a mysterious boat accident. No one dares to cross it at night. And if you want to know why, then listen to my tale. In truth, the story of the bridge wasn't one anyone would want to hear. But I was a curious child, eager to uncover dark secrets, so I didn't ignore it. According to my mother, this bridge had once been the only path connecting two small villages, Hickory Grove and Fairview. In the early 20th century, the bridge was a vital part of life for the people of both villages. But one night, after a tragic accident, the bridge was abandoned and closed to the public. The mysterious boat accident happened on a full moon night. A boat carrying many people got lost and crashed into a large rock beneath the bridge. People said it was an accident, but no one knew for sure. Only a few survived, but they carried strange and unexplainable memories of what happened that night. The stories they told were vague, eerie, and afterward, no one dared to speak of it again. My mother said, since then, people began talking about the haunting. On every full moon night, wet footprints appear on the bridge, stretching from the middle of the bridge to the cemetery. No one dares to go near it then. And those who survived the boat accident, they never spoke again. Whether it was true or not, the story of the bridge haunted me throughout my childhood. But it wasn't just the tales. Gradually, strange signs began to appear. One night, when I was older, I returned to Hickory Grove, where my mother still lived in the old wooden house after finishing my studies in the city. That night the moon was unusually bright, casting its light through the tree leaves along the village path. I felt an odd sensation, as if someone were watching me. Suddenly, I remembered the story of the bridge, and an irresistible thought arose within me. I had to go there. As I approached the bridge, I felt the atmosphere shift suddenly. A chilling silence enveloped everything around me. The suspension bridge, a dull, weathered block of concrete, swayed under the wind. Even though no one had dared cross for many years, I could still feel a strange pull, making it impossible to take my eyes off the bridge. I decided to walk across the bridge, despite the fear building inside me. But as soon as I stepped onto it, a cold gust of wind blew through, as though someone had hurried across the bridge. The wind howled, as if someone were calling my name, but I couldn't turn back. I kept walking, step by step. Suddenly, I saw a wet trail, stretching from the middle of the bridge toward the cemetery. My legs seemed to freeze, unable to move. The wet footprints, faint like ghostly shadows, extended and faded into the night. That was when I heard the strange sound, a soft sigh, as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned around, but there was no one. The bridge remained silent, only the wind and trees swaying, but the feeling of being watched sent a chill down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a figure standing on the bridge with only tears and wet footprints silently blurring on the ground. I couldn't help but wonder who had crossed that bridge on that full moon night. The next morning, I went to speak with the villagers. They told me that on full moon nights, the bridge still shows those wet footprints, as if a soul is still wandering between this world and the next. They also reminded me that no one dares to cross the bridge at night anymore. I couldn't explain what had happened. Could it be a curse from the boat accident or just my imagination? But one thing was certain. The blood bridge still haunted me. And perhaps it would haunt anyone who dared to cross it on a full moon night. Every full moon night, when darkness descends, the cold and heavy sensation returns, as if an invisible hand is pulling me down into an endless abyss. But this time, I could not resist the urge to return to the bridge. I felt that there were still untold stories about this bridge waiting for me to uncover. And a part of me could not let go of that curiosity. A week after the night I witnessed the wet footprints stretching across the bridge, I returned to Hickory Grove. This small town seemed unchanged over the years. The old wooden houses still maintained their shape, and the only asphalt road remained quiet, with few people passing through. But this time, I no longer felt the familiar sense of safety. An invisible fear clung to me like a shadow. I went to visit Uncle Harlan, a long-time resident here, who I remembered had once told me about the truth behind the bridge. He was the only one who still retained memories of the boat disaster, but now he had become reserved and silent. When I arrived at his house, Uncle Harlan was sitting in a dark room, the dim light from a lamp, not enough to dispel the heavy darkness in the space. "I've heard you're going back there," Uncle Harlan said, his voice hoarse, as if he had been fighting with painful memories for a long time. "The bridge, it's not just an ordinary bridge. It's where the souls of the lost dead find their way back." I listened silently, my eyes fixed on him. He looked at me as if thinking deeply about something, then continued. "That night, when the boat capsized, not everyone died. The survivors, they witnessed things that can't be spoken. They saw something under the bridge, a creature that wasn't human, a shadow moving through the darkness. And from then on, these souls have been wandering around the bridge. Every full moon night, they try to escape." Uncle Harlan's story sent a chill down my spine. The images he described were exactly what I felt on that first night standing on the bridge. But what made me even more afraid were the wet footprints. They weren't just physical traces, but perhaps a sign of an intersection between the world of the living and the dead. That night, I decided to return to the bridge. The bright moonlight shone on the empty road leading to the bridge. The trees surrounding it whispered with the wind, as if they were talking to each other. The suspension bridge stood there, silent, its cables already starting to decay with time, and the old wooden planks creaked softly under my feet. I set foot on the bridge once more, but this time I was not alone. There was a strange feeling, as if someone was standing right behind me. But when I turned, no one was there. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm, but my footsteps seemed inaudible in the stillness. Only the wind, the rustling of the leaves, but no other sounds. Suddenly, I heard a soft noise, as if someone had stepped out from the darkness. I turned again, and then I saw it. The wet footprints stretching from the middle of the bridge toward the cemetery. But this time, they were not just traces of someone. They moved, extending further, as if an invisible force was controlling them. My heart pounded loudly, uncontrollably. A dizzying, fearful sensation overwhelmed my body. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew I had to leave immediately. As I turned to run, a strange sound echoed from behind, like a scream, or perhaps the sigh of someone caught between this world and the next. I couldn't pinpoint the source of the sound, but it definitely came from the bridge. Turning around in haste, I saw the light of a lantern piercing through the dense darkness. And I ran as fast as I could. But when I neared the end of the bridge, a figure suddenly appeared before me. She, or perhaps her soul, was wearing a white dress, stained with mud. Her face was blurred, as if it didn't belong to this world. She didn't speak, only stood there, staring at me with eyes that were black, empty pools of water. I couldn't move, though my heart wanted to burst from fear. The figure stood there for a moment, then suddenly vanished into the air, leaving behind a chilling sensation that couldn't be explained. I couldn't bring myself to return to the bridge again. When I looked back, the wet footprints were gone. The heavy feeling still clung to me, as if a part of my soul had been left behind there. As I left the bridge, I realized that I was not only facing the souls of the dead, but also invisible forces that couldn't be explained. The bridge was not just a place for crossing. It was a boundary, a border between life and death, where forgotten spirits and terrifying truths still existed. But perhaps the greatest question remains unanswered. Will I be able to escape this bridge? Or will I be the next to become one of those wet footprints? A few days after I encountered the ghost at the bridge, I couldn't shake the heavy feeling in my heart. Night after night, I was haunted by the blurry images of the woman in the white dress, the heavy footsteps, the wet footprints, the howling wind that sounded like a call from deep within. All these things kept swirling in my mind, though I tried to convince myself that it was just an illusion. A part of me knew that it wasn't. Something was waiting for me, and it wasn't just a fictional story. As another week passed, I could no longer resist. The curiosity, the feeling of being drawn back to that bridge, had become an obsession I couldn't let go of. Even though I knew I was putting myself in danger, I decided to return. This time, I wasn't going alone. I needed help, as the feeling of an unknown force lingering around me was becoming unbearable. I called Sarah, a longtime friend. Sarah had been my friend since high school, and she wasn't easily spooked by ghost stories. But when I told her about what had happened, about the bridge, the ghosts, and the wet footprints, she agreed without hesitation to accompany me back. She said that if I couldn't overcome my fear, she would help me face it. "We'll go together," Sarah said, her voice steady, as if she was trying to convince herself. "Together, we'll get to the bottom of this." That night, we stood in front of the hanging bridge. The moon was still shining brightly, and the trees around us seemed to sway in the wind. Everything was quiet, but I felt an eerie unease, as though someone was staring at me from the darkness. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked, looking at me with concern, but also determination. "We'll walk across the bridge, Agap," I replied, though I wasn't sure myself. No matter what, as we stepped onto the bridge, I could feel the difference. There was a change in the air, heavy and thick. The bridge creaked with every step we took, the old wood groaning as if echoing in the silence. Sarah walked behind me, gripping the cable tightly, as if trying to keep herself from being swept away by the strange atmosphere of the bridge. We had walked for a while when suddenly I heard a sound. Footsteps. The feeling that someone was walking behind me. But when I turned around, no one was there. It was real footsteps, not the sound of the wind, not an illusion. Each step was clear, distinct, and close. My heart started to race, not out of fear, but because I realized I wasn't alone. "Sarah, do you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her eyes worried but calm. "Yes, I hear it too," she whispered, "but we have to keep going." We continued walking, but by now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept past us, as if someone had just walked by. I saw a shadowy figure stumbling in the dark, then disappearing quickly. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide, but I couldn't answer. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. When we reached the middle of the bridge, something brushed against my feet. A cold streak of water. I looked down, and this time I had no doubts. The wet footprints were still there, but now they were moving toward us. It was as if they were inviting us, as if someone was guiding us. "No, we can't keep going," I whispered, the suffocating feeling overwhelming me. "We need to leave now." But Sarah, with unwavering resolve, stepped closer to the footprints. "I think we need to understand this before we leave," she said, her eyes shining, as if some force was pulling her in. The moment she stepped closer to the wet prints, a chilling wind rushed in, and a shadowy figure appeared right in front of us. This time, it didn't disappear like the others. A woman in a white dress, her long hair flowing, but her face was still blurry, indistinct. The ghost said nothing. She just stood there, staring at us with empty eyes, tears filling them. Then a sigh echoed, like a scream, from the depths of an abyss, filling the space. Sarah gripped my hand, and in her eyes I saw a clear fear. She shuddered, but still tried to stay strong. She's not alive." I didn't respond, just felt the cold breath around me. The ghost began to walk, the wet footprints continuing to stretch, leading us into the darkness. She didn't speak a word, but there was a clear sense that she wanted us to follow. And so Sarah and I walked after her, unable to turn back, unable to stop. It felt as though an invisible force was pulling us into something we couldn't explain. This spirit, or perhaps this force, was leading us into another world. A world of footsteps that couldn't turn back, of forgotten memories. The price we would pay might be that we would never escape from this bridge, just like the wet footprints that had been etched deep into the ground. And then, in that moment, I realized something I had never fully understood before. The blood-hanging bridge wasn't just a bridge. It was a door leading to souls that had been forgotten. And perhaps we too would become those forgotten souls forever. Story 2. The Forbidden Well Behind the House. A Curse from Another World. I clearly remember the first time I heard about the forbidden well behind the house. It was a scorching summer, with the sun sparkling down from above, but the cool feeling from the well still felt like an invitation. My grandmother, a sharp and always stern woman, told me the story, even though she rarely shared anything strange. But that day, I remember the look in her eyes, so serious that I knew I had to listen. That well is not an ordinary well. It's a place that has witnessed things no one should know. Never call anyone's name when you're near it, she said, her voice hoarse, as if trying to stop me from discovering something dangerous. I didn't understand at the time. I just thought she wanted to protect me from children's mischief. But little did I know, that was a warning I should never have ignored. When my friends and I started playing around the area one afternoon, we decided to dare each other. The forbidden well behind the house, surrounded by thick trees, looked like a mysterious place that only the brave would dare to approach. Every time I saw it, a strange, indescribable feeling would pass through me. The thick grass growing around the well only left a small gap, enough for us to see the dark bottom below. At that moment, my friends and I stood around the well, daring each other like a child's game. One of my friends, Mike, was the first to break the silence with a teasing tone. So, who dares to call the name of someone they hate into this well? Let's see if it answers. Everyone burst into laughter. I looked around and saw the eyes of my friends lighting up, waiting for someone to do something cool. I hesitated, looked at the well, then finally, Mike stepped forward, unusually confident. "Tommy," he called out loudly, as if challenging himself. As soon as the name Tommy echoed in the air, a chilling silence took over the space. A cold gust of wind suddenly blew through, making the leaves rustle like a warning. I thought it was just a coincidence. But then the strange things began to happen. The next day, I woke up with a foggy feeling, unsure of what had happened the night before. When I stepped outside and looked toward the well, I realized something was wrong. Mike, the one who had called Tommy's name in the game yesterday, was standing at his door, his face pale as if he hadn't slept all night. But the strangest thing was his shadow. I couldn't see a shadow under Mike's feet. At first, I didn't believe my eyes. I squinted, trying to get a clearer view. Still no shadow. Mike looked at me, his eyes empty, like someone who had lost their soul. "Mike, are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just stood there, staring at me without saying anything. A chilling sensation spread from deep within me. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I knew something was happening, but I couldn't explain it. Mike's shadow, or rather the absence of it, made me feel like something had taken over his body. I quickly ran to the houses of my other friends, trying to find an explanation. But what I received was only eerie silence. My grandmother simply told me, "Remember what I warned you. The well is not a place for playing around." That's when I understood that she wasn't joking. That evening, I decided to return to the well, hoping to figure out why Mike had become like that. Everything within me felt an unclear sense of fear, but I couldn't stop myself. When I got closer to the well, I sensed an inexplicable stillness. All the surrounding sounds seemed blocked out, and a presence, unseen but so clear that I could feel it, was all around. Suddenly I heard a voice, low and hoarse but clear. "Don't call any names anymore." That voice, it felt like a reminder but it carried with it danger. I turned around, not daring to look at the well, and hurriedly ran home, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything around me was dark, and I felt like something was chasing me, though there was nothing there. The next day, I didn't see Mike anymore. He seemed to have vanished from this world. All I found was a small piece of paper with a barely legible handwritten note. Never call anyone's name again. That was all that remained of him. As for the forbidden well behind the house, I no longer dared to go near it. But I knew one thing for sure. That well held a strange power that I couldn't understand. And perhaps it never wanted anyone to know. Since that day, every time I think about the well, I feel the shadow of regret. It reminds me that sometimes harmless jokes can open doors that you can't close, and the forbidden well behind the house, with its warning, still silently waits, never forgetting and never forgiving. After Mike disappeared, a heavy and terrifying feeling weighed down on all of us. Everything seemed to change overnight. The whole neighborhood, my old friends, now avoided mentioning the well behind the house, as if silence was the only way to protect themselves from the incomprehensible secrets. But I couldn't forget what had happened. The shadow under Mike's feet still haunted me every night. For the past week, I haven't dared to go outside at night, and every strange sound in the house made me feel like I was being watched. The voice from that night when I stood by the well still echoed in my mind. Don't call their name anymore. It felt like someone was watching me from the darkness, and there was nothing I could do to escape it. My grandmother no longer said anything about the well after that, but I knew she was also afraid of something. That day, I decided I had to find the truth. I couldn't live in fear forever. I had to return to the well, to face what had happened, even if it was a mistake. But as I approached the well, I felt a cold gust of air rising from within it. This feeling was different from before, as if some force was waiting for me. The well was unchanged, but now I felt that it was not just an abandoned well, but a gateway, a passage to another world. I stood there, looking down into the deep well, my heart suddenly heavy. The fear I felt at that moment was indescribable. It was as though some invisible force was pulling me closer, urging me to step down into the bottom of the well. I recalled the stories my grandmother used to tell about this well. She said the well had existed for a long time, since the time of our ancestors, when strange and deadly events had occurred around here. There were people who had disappeared without a trace after coming close to the well. She said the well was not a place to play, and if you called someone's name near it, that name would never belong to that person again. It would belong to something else, something no one of us wanted to encounter. As I stood there, the voice echoed again in my head, this time clearer and stronger. You will have to pay the price. I couldn't think anymore. A feeling like being shackled pulled me towards the well. My mind had become foggy, and I couldn't tell the difference between reality and illusion anymore. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through, knocking me to the ground. I staggered to my feet, just in time to see a figure standing in the distance. It was Mike. I couldn't believe my eyes. He had no shadow under his feet, just like the day before. But this time, I didn't just see him standing there. I could feel an indescribable presence. Mike looked at me, but not with the gaze I once knew. It was cold and unfamiliar, as if something had taken over his body. He was no longer the friend I once knew. His hoarse voice rang out, but it wasn't Mike's voice anymore. You shouldn't be here. You can't escape anymore. This time, I didn't dare stand still. I turned and ran for my life, but Mike's voice kept echoing in my head, as if he was right behind me. As I ran past familiar houses, I noticed something strange. Every time I turned my head, there was no one in sight. But when I paused for a moment, I heard footsteps, soft and steady, as if someone was right behind me. I didn't dare turn back. I ran and ran until I finally reached Sarah's house, a close friend whom I always trusted. I knocked on the door, not thinking about anything else but wanting to find some safety. The door opened, and Sarah looked at me, surprised. What's going on? I couldn't finish my sentence, only stammering, Mike, he's not him anymore. Sarah looked at me, her worry beginning to show on her face. Don't say anything more, Sarah said, her voice soft but full of concern. I've heard about that well. The well is not a good place. You need to leave here. We can't stop now. It won't let us go. I didn't understand what she was saying, but there was something in her eyes that made me feel afraid. We sat down in Sarah's house, trying not to think about the well, but my mind couldn't escape that strange feeling. I knew something was coming closer. It was no longer a warning, but a reality that we couldn't run from. And when I looked out the window, I saw the silhouette of someone standing in the distance, in front of the house. It was Mike, unmistakably, but this time he was standing still, just watching us without saying a word. The well was no longer just a well. It was a curse. And now it had started to spread. The days following my encounter with Mike were not the same. The feeling of being haunted and trapped by the well still lingered. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mike's figure standing far away, his feet casting no shadow. Though I tried to avoid it, everything seemed to be getting worse and worse. I decided I couldn't just sit idly and wait for fate. The forbidden well behind the house. I couldn't let it keep haunting me. But I knew that if I didn't understand what was happening, I wouldn't be able to escape. I needed to learn about the well, understand the warnings my grandmother had given, and uncover the truths my family had kept hidden. After hearing about what had happened, Sarah seemed unable to continue living in that constant fear. Though still worried, she decided to join me in investigating the well. There was something in her voice, an urgency I had never heard before, as if she knew more about the well than I had imagined. We need to find a way to put an end to this curse, Sarah said, her voice trembling, but her gaze was filled with determination. That well isn't something one person can deal with alone. The two of us began researching the history of the well. We asked around the neighborhood, speaking to the long-time residents. Each person, though having heard the story about the well, simply shook their head and refused to say anything further. But I noticed their eyes, filled with fear, as if there was something they couldn't admit. One day, while looking for answers, I met an elderly woman named Mrs. Holloway, who had lived near the well her entire life. When I asked her about the well, she shuddered and pulled me close to the window, as if afraid someone was listening. That well? It belongs to an ancient family, she began, her voice low and hard to hear. They did things no one should ever do. The well isn't just a water source. It's where the souls of the damned are trapped. When the well was dug, they cast in the souls of the guilty, the cursed beings. and those souls never wanted to leave. I listened, my heart pounding, as Mrs. Holloway continued. One day, a child from that family called the name of their relative into the well, just like what you did. And after that, the family vanished, as if they had never existed. Those who passed by the well either disappeared or became ghosts. And anyone brave enough to call someone else's name will have to pay the price. Sarah and I exchanged a look, understanding that this was no longer just a game. The forbidden well truly held a terrible power, and we had made a grave mistake by calling out. After our conversation with Mrs. Holloway, we decided to return to the well to confront it. We had to do something. Otherwise, we would never live in peace. But before we left, I noticed something strange. Every time I was near the well, I felt like invisible eyes were watching me, as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned around, but saw no one. The cold, suffocating feeling followed me like a shadow that never left. When we reached the well, the atmosphere around us suddenly became eerily quiet. Not a sound, no wind. We stood looking into the well, where the deep darkness seemed to swallow everything. Sarah was the first to step closer to the well, but she didn't dare look down into its depths. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Holloway said it can be resolved, but how do we do it? I didn't know how to answer. I looked down into the well again, and then I saw something. Not my own reflection, but the shadow of someone else. A blurry figure, yet distinct, as if rising from the depths of the well. My heart raced, and I stepped back. But Sarah didn't notice anything. She continued standing there, mumbling words I couldn't make out. "We have to free that soul," Sarah whispered. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through, tugging at our hair and creating a strange sound, like a faint giggle echoing. Then, unexpectedly, a voice came from the well. It wasn't anyone from us, but it was Mike's voice. "Run. You can't save yourself." The voice sounded like a final warning. I grabbed Sarah and pulled her back, and we turned to run home. But when we glanced back, I saw a figure standing near the well. Mike's shadow, with no feet, staring at us. His mouth twisted into a cold smile. We didn't dare turn back again. There was only one thing we knew for sure. That well was not something we could easily face. And if we didn't find a way to free the trapped souls within, it would never let us go. Story 3. The Forgotten Soul in the Family Ancestry. I have always felt that there was something strange about my family. It wasn't something I could see or touch, but rather a vague feeling, like a ghost that never leaves me. Everything started when I accidentally discovered the truth about my family's ancestry. A secret no one wanted to talk about. The L family is one of the oldest families in the remote land of northern Vermont, USA. The house I live in was built in the 19th century, where the old walls seemed to contain too many untold stories. My mother, who always lived with an indescribable calmness, once said that our family had a less than beautiful history. But I never thought those words carried such a terrifying obsession. The story began when I found an old book in the basement of the house. It was a family ledger, covered in dust and filled with the marks of time. As I flipped through the pages, the names seemed to glide past my eyes like ghosts that had long ceased to exist. But then, a name appeared. The Forgotten Soul. It was a strange note, unlike any of the other entries in the family history. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I saw that line. It was like a sign, a warning that I could never quite understand. My curiosity made it impossible to stop. That name belonged to a branch of the family that had been erased. A branch no one in the L family wanted to mention. According to the book, all the people from this branch had a tragic end, dying young or going insane, and no one dared speak of them. The more I read, the more I felt a sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. The names in this branch, most of them, had terrible fates. One died at the age of 10, another died in delirium, eyes clouded, mouth gasping, as if seeing something terrifying. I couldn't understand why these people had been erased from the family, as if they had never existed. Why did my family have such a secret? I decided to dig deeper. My mother and grandfather refused to answer any questions related to the family history, but I felt I couldn't give up. One evening, when everyone had fallen asleep, I sneaked into the study, where the family's old documents were stored. I found a black and white photo of a man standing in front of an old house, the light dim, as if obscured by a layer of fog. This was a photo of my great-grandfather, who had passed away when my mother was still a young girl. But the strange thing was, in this photo, he had a vacant look, as if he had seen something not belonging to this world. The fear intensified as I realized that everyone in the family had strange signs. My grandparents, although they never spoke of it, always seemed to have an anxious look that I couldn't describe. On quiet nights, I would hear soft sighs from the room upstairs, as if someone were awake, wandering in the dark. And then I discovered a terrifying truth. I was the last living member of the L family. All the people from the past generations had either died or disappeared under strange circumstances. Then one night, I woke up in the middle of a nightmare. I saw a shadowy figure standing by the window. The moonlight shone in, casting a pale, ghostly glow like an omen. The shadow was of a woman wearing a long white dress, her face blurred in the darkness. I couldn't see her clearly, but I could feel her gaze. It was a cold, hateful gaze. My breathing grew heavy, and my heart raced. I wanted to scream, but couldn't. The shadow seemed to be glued to me, unable to escape. Then, a hoarse, cold voice echoed in the air. "You are the last. Tell our story." After that, I found myself standing in front of an old house. This house, I realized, was the same one in the photo I had found in the study. The door was wide open, and I stepped inside. In the dark space, I heard footsteps growing louder, coming closer and closer. But when I turned around, no one was behind me. Only the sound of my own heavy, cold breathing. The room grew pitch dark, with only an old table and an armchair remaining. On the table, there was an ancient plate, its surface scratched and covered in dust. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The feeling that I was standing in the middle of a trap became clearer and clearer. But no matter what, I had to know the truth. Because I was the last of this bloodline. The night I stood in that dark room, the light from the oil lamp seemed to be swallowed by an overwhelming silence. I felt that something was wrong. The room devoured even the smallest sounds, including my own breath. There was no one there but me, yet it felt as if thousands of eyes were watching me from the darkness. The antique armchair remained quietly in place, like a silent witness. I couldn't take my eyes off the plate, sitting on the table, even though every hair on my body stood on end from an indescribable feeling of fear. I didn't understand why, but I felt compelled to know everything, even if it meant paying the highest price. I walked toward the table, but each step made the space around me feel heavier. My footsteps echoed like nails being hammered in a dark cellar, and suddenly, a cold chill ran down my spine. When I leaned down to examine the plate, a shadow passed before my eyes. "You have come," the voice echoed, as if it was coming from deep within the walls, from shadows I couldn't see. I jerked around, but no one was there, only the stillness of the air as if it had stopped breathing. Then I saw something strange on the plate. A message, faint but clear. The handwriting was so old, it seemed as if it had been etched there centuries ago. "We will never let you go." My heart pounded in my chest. The writing, I couldn't understand it, but there was a sense that I had seen it somewhere before, in vague memories. The warnings from the past, the things that had been hidden for so long. At that moment, I suddenly remembered what my mother had said when I was a child. In the family tree of the L family, there are forgotten souls. These souls can never rest, and they will never forgive those who dig too deep into the past. Those words suddenly rang in my head like a warning bell. As I was about to step back, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the oil lamp on the table. The entire room plunged into darkness. All I could hear was the howling wind, like sounds from another world, a world not of our own. Then, from deep within the darkness, a figure appeared. The figure was tall, its form vague, as if made from mist. A woman, with long hair covering her eyes, her face blurred as if it couldn't be seen clearly. But her eyes, those eyes, they stared at me coldly, as if filled with a hatred that spanned millennia. I couldn't move. I could only stand and feel fear rising within every cell of my body. Suddenly she spoke, her voice sounding like it came from a world of the dead. "You have awakened. You will be the next." That was when I realized that I was not just facing a ghost, but a curse that had lasted for generations. My family, the L family, had paid a heavy price for a secret that had been hidden for far too long. The forgotten souls could never be at peace, and they found a way to return. And I, unknowingly, had dragged them into the light. I couldn't understand why I was the one who had to face this. How could I escape the curses of my family? That question kept gnawing at me, but there was no answer. I had no choice but to keep walking down this path. Even though everything was getting worse, the next day, I decided to visit an old friend of my mother's, Mrs. Clara, a woman who had lived in this land her entire life. Mrs. Clara was one of the few people still alive who might know more about my family than I could imagine. When I told her about what happened the night before, she sat silently, her eyes filled with sadness. "You shouldn't dig too much into the past," she said, her voice full of concern. "These souls are not just memories. They are living entities. And if you don't stop, they will take everything you hold dear." Mrs. Clara told me stories of past generations in my family, about a mysterious event from the 1800s. One branch of our family, which people referred to as the Cursed Branch, had been ostracized after a horrific event. They were rumored to have participated in dark rituals to gain power and eternal life. But the price they paid was that the souls would haunt them forever. I suddenly realized that I was standing at a threshold that couldn't be undone. Those souls, Those terrifying memories I couldn't comprehend had begun to return. They had waited for me, the last of my family line, to finish the story that had been left unfinished centuries ago. "You can't escape," Mrs. Clara said, her voice like a prophecy. "There's only one way to stop all of this, but you will have to pay a price no one could ever imagine." That was when I realized the worst truth. The price I would have to pay was my soul. That night, when I returned to the old house, I saw the window of the room I had entered earlier wide open. The air inside was damp and cold. It felt as if someone was still there, waiting. This house was no longer just a place I lived in. It was the tomb of my family, where their souls would never find peace. And now I had done what no one in my family dared to do. I had awakened the past, and now I would have to pay the price. What I had experienced in the past 2 days felt like living in a nightmare I could never wake up from. Since discovering the family's genealogy, full of strange marks and erased names, I had not found peace in my mind. Every night, I would hear sighs in the dark, strange sounds around the house that I couldn't explain. And I understood that what I had awakened wasn't just a story from the distant past, but a curse waiting to take away everything I held dear. That evening, when I stepped into the old family room, I felt something different. The air in the room was colder than usual. The paintings on the walls seemed to follow me with the faint eyes of the dead. I gently placed my hand on the wooden table where I had found the strange writing yesterday. But today, there was nothing. The old plate, which had once held strange characters, now lay empty. There was no trace of anything, as if everything I had seen was just an illusion. The inescapable feeling of being chased caused me to panic. I turned around, intending to leave the room, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, a cold breeze blew through, forcing me to stop. Outside the window, the tree branches hung low like dry, stiff hands reaching out. Then I heard soft footsteps echoing from the end of the hallway. It must be Mom or Grandpa, I told myself, though I still felt uncertain. But when I turned around, no one was there. Only darkness surrounded me. I knew I couldn't escape this feeling. The footsteps continued, but they didn't come from anyone. They came from deep within the house itself. I couldn't explain it, but I felt the presence of someone from long ago. With one last ounce of patience, I made my way toward the stairs leading down to the basement. It was as if some call was pulling me closer to the long-buried secrets. The basement had always been a place I avoided, where old dusty items accumulated, a place holding my family's memories I never wanted to revisit. But today, I couldn't refuse. When I opened the basement door, a cold gust of air rushed out, carrying the heavy smell of dampness. The room was pitch black, save for a faint light from a dim bulb. I stepped in, feeling as if someone had been waiting for me there for a long time. I found the old wooden box my mother had once mentioned. Inside, I found tightly sealed documents marked with strange signs, drawings, maps, and an old book, its pages yellowed with age. I opened the book, and a cold draft suddenly hit my face. The book contained stories about those who had been cursed, people cast aside by the L family, shunned and trapped in a parallel universe. They weren't ordinary souls. The curses would never end. One story in the book made me stop. It was about a woman named Eliza, who was accused of being a witch in the 1800s. She was imprisoned in my family's old house, and after her death, her soul never found peace. The pages described her being dragged away, repeatedly uttering terrifying curses. You will never have peace. Your bloodline will always be claimed by souls that cannot escape. The name Eliza made me shiver. I realized that she was part of the souls I was now facing. And all of these souls, they couldn't die. And they would keep returning to hunt down my family. I kept reading, and I saw that there was a strange ritual described in the book. It was a ritual that could calm the curse, but the price to pay was great. One soul had to be sacrificed in exchange for peace for the family. But who in my family could make such a sacrifice? I realized then that I wasn't just facing an invisible curse. I was also facing the harsh truth that I was being drawn into this game. I could become that sacrificed soul. Suddenly, a loud noise came from behind me. I turned around and saw a figure standing there, eyes glowing in the darkness. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was my mother, but not the mother I knew. She looked like a shadowy figure, her face wrinkled and gaunt, as if time had consumed her. "Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer, only silently stepped toward me. And as she got closer, I realized her eyes were hollow, like an endless abyss. "Mom!" I screamed, stepping back, but I couldn't escape. The shadow was too close now, and in that moment, I realized that my family, the L family, had been trapped in an endless cycle they couldn't break free from. These souls wouldn't let me go. They would continue to haunt me until I became one of them. And when the darkness consumed everything, I knew I had no way out. Story 4. The Ceremony to Bring the Ghost Bride's Soul. The evening rain showed no signs of stopping, and the sky was overcast, like a grey cloth covering the entire desolate countryside. The faint lights from the houses along the road flickered through the dense mist. This was the place I decided to stop after a long journey down a deserted road. A place where I had no idea I would have to face the most terrifying ordeal of my life. I, Thomas Ward, a man who had recently gone through the agonizing loss of my wife in an inexplicable accident, came to this land hoping to find peace. This land, located in a remote corner of Massachusetts, had a strange tradition I had never heard of before. A wedding ceremony unlike any wedding I had ever known. When I arrived, this village seemed like a peaceful, distant place, with stone paths covered in fallen leaves and quaint old wooden houses. However, there was something that unsettled me. The people here, from the elderly to the children, wore cold and solemn expressions, as though they were hiding a dark secret they would never reveal. I unintentionally became involved in a bizarre ceremony on the very first night I arrived. At first, I thought it was just a regular funeral, but odd details gradually emerged that made me question everything. It was a large funeral with rituals unlike any I had ever seen. The mourners wore all white, and the prayers they uttered had a strange melody, as though they were not praying for the deceased, but for some other force. What truly unsettled me was when the funeral ended, and everyone began to gather around a special coffin. The coffin was not made of ordinary wood, but was glossy black, showing no signs that it was for a dead person. The villagers started to form a circle around the coffin, and then they began to chant strange songs. as if waiting for something or someone. When I tried to leave the funeral and head back to my hotel, I was suddenly pulled back by a woman. She had a very peculiar appearance, with a pale face, deep-set eyes, and lips tightly pressed together, as if she was holding a secret she could never reveal. She said, "Stranger, you don't understand. The ghost bride soul ceremony is of utmost importance. If you leave now, you will never leave this place." I barely heard her words before a cold gust of wind blew through. I didn't fully understand what she said, but I could feel a strange obsession in the air. Returning to the hotel, I tried to dismiss any negative thoughts and prepare to rest. But that night, I couldn't sleep. In a daze, I felt like I was standing in a crowd, wearing a pure white wedding dress. A strange sensation overtook my body. I couldn't move, couldn't cry for help. The people around me all wore masks, and no faces were visible. Only shadowy figures stood around me. Figures I couldn't recognize. Then suddenly, I felt myself being pulled away. My steps were forced, and I couldn't resist. The further I went, the more I felt a terrifying force guiding me, leading me to an unfamiliar place. A large door opened before me. Inside was a pitch-black room, with only the faint light of old oil lamps. In the center of the room stood a large table with an ancient mirror on top. When I looked into the mirror, I didn't see my reflection. Instead, I saw a ghostly bride in a white gown, her face covered by a veil. She stood there, silent, her empty eyes staring at me. Suddenly, the bride in the mirror opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a cold wave, like snow falling, passed through my body, freezing me in place. Just as I felt I could no longer breathe, I jolted awake. But when I opened my eyes, the room was still unchanged. At that moment, I heard a knock on the door. A deep voice echoed, "The ghost bride's soul ceremony has begun. You must be there on time." Who was it? Why was I the one called? There was no time to think. I quickly dressed and rushed outside. My steps felt as though someone else was controlling them. When I arrived at the house where the ceremony was being held, everything became even stranger. Inside the house, the participants of the ceremony wore masks, and they said nothing, only looking at me with cold eyes, as though I was already part of their ritual. I was pulled to the center of the room, where a large table awaited. In front of me stood a gaunt man in a black suit, pointing toward the mirror. He said, "Look into it. Don't be afraid. The bride is waiting." The faceless ghosts still surrounded me, and the mirror seemed to pull me in. A wave of fear surged within me, but I couldn't leave, as if I was bound to this festival forever. I looked into the mirror once again, and this time I saw myself, not as I was, but as a woman in a wedding dress, her face pale, her eyes empty. Suddenly, I understood that I had become a part of this story, and I could never escape it. That night, when I looked into the mirror, I couldn't distinguish what was real from what was illusion. The image of the ghostly bride in the pure white wedding dress not only reflected in the mirror, but also haunted my mind, trapping me in its grip. It felt as though I had been trapped in an endless loop, where everything kept repeating, with no way out. When I turned around, everyone in the room had disappeared. The house, once full of people, was now empty, with only me standing alone in the darkened space. The coldness enveloped me, as if the room wasn't a home, but a place created only to imprison cursed souls. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the room, trying to find an escape. The door before me creaked open, as if waiting for me to step outside. But as soon as I stepped out, a cold wind seemed to blow through me, threatening to sweep everything away. From a distance, I could hear footsteps, but they were not mine. It was a strange sound, rhythmic, unmistakable. The footsteps seemed to be drawing nearer, right behind me. I turned around, but saw no one. The houses around me remained silent, with no figure in sight. But at that moment, I clearly heard a whisper, as if someone was calling my name. Thomas. The voice was soft as though it came from another world. I couldn't do anything but keep moving forward, though the feeling of being watched made it hard to breathe. The night was dark and cold, making everything feel unclear. As I passed by an old house, the light from a slightly opened window cast a faint glow. I couldn't resist the curiosity and moved closer to look inside. In the dim light, I saw a woman's figure. She was standing in the room, silently staring out the window. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were deep black. Although her face was unclear, her gaze seemed to have a strange power, pulling my mind toward her. This time, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She stared at me, her empty eyes never blinking, but I felt as though she was smiling. A faint smile, void of any warmth. It seemed as though she wanted to say something, but no sound came from her lips. Then, as if realizing my presence, she slowly turned away and walked deeper into the house. I didn't understand why, but a part of me urged me to follow her. Quietly, I stepped into the house, careful not to make a sound. Every step I took felt as though it was being watched, as if an invisible eye was tracking my every movement. As I entered, I noticed that this house was unlike any I had ever seen before. Everything inside seemed old, as though it had been there for ages. The paintings on the walls, the worn wooden chairs, all had a strange air, as if they were hiding something terrible. I moved into a room further inside. In the dark space, I saw a large table covered with a white cloth, and on the table was a large mirror, like the one the bride had in my dream. As I approached, a gust of cold air blew through, making me shiver uncontrollably. In the mirror, I saw the figure of the bride, not a reflection of me, but the image of the ghostly bride from before. But this time, she didn't just stand there. She stepped out of the mirror, one step at a time, moving closer to me. It felt as though I was being pulled into another space, where time and space no longer existed. The bride moved closer to me, her deep black eyes never leaving me. Suddenly she spoke, her voice soft yet chilling. "You cannot leave. You are one of us." The bone-chilling cold froze me in place. I wanted to run, but my legs felt as though they were nailed to the floor. The sensation of being trapped in this room full of haunting images made it impossible for me to breathe. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. This time, they weren't from the ghostly bride, but from others. I turned around and saw a procession of people, all dressed in wedding attire, but none of them had faces. They stood there, silent, just waiting for me. The dim light from the oil lamps cast an eerie glow, making the scene even more supernatural. The procession began to move, pulling me along. No one said a word, only the sound of their steady footsteps echoing through the darkness. At that moment, I realized the strangest thing. I was no longer myself. My eyes had changed. They were no longer mine, but the eyes of the ghostly bride. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The further we went, the more I felt myself being drawn into a trance, as if I had become part of this ritual and couldn't escape. We walked on until we stopped in front of a large house where a huge fire was blazing. In the flickering light of the flames, I saw the vacant faces of the people around me. Everything seemed unreal now. Only me and them, standing in the darkness, between the flames, between death. "We will bring the bride's soul back," a voice rang out, and then all fell silent. It was then that I realized I could never turn back. The fire in the grand house burned brightly, its light dancing on the cold stone walls, creating grotesque shapes. The suffocating feeling still enveloped me. The faceless figures stood there, surrounding me, as though they were part of this dark space, as if they had become the very ghosts of the village. My footsteps couldn't stop, and I had no idea where I was going. They led me into the house where the space became hazy, filled with an eerie red light from the flames. Each painting on the wall, every decoration, seemed to bear the marks of a bygone era with undeniable decay. I felt as though I was entering a place not of this world. Everything around me seemed to move, yet no one was truly acting. The discomfort grew stronger, but I couldn't escape the grip of those strange figures. As I stepped into the main room, the red light from the fire suddenly went out. The space was instantly swallowed by darkness, and I felt a chill creeping into my body. A low, deep voice rang out from the shadows. "Welcome to the Ghost Bride's soul summoning ceremony." I couldn't identify the speaker, but the voice seemed to envelop the entire space. I struggled to breathe, but it felt as if the air was being sucked from my lungs. The faceless ghosts surrounded me, their invisible gazes unseen, but I could feel their presence. The cold seeped into every cell of my body, and I felt like I was no longer myself. Then, a figure appeared from the darkness, slowly becoming visible in the dim light. It was the Ghost Bride, but this time, she didn't just stand silently. She moved forward, her steps light and silent, as if she was gliding over the ground. Her dark eyes, no longer empty as they had been before, now held a sense of determination and hatred. She moved closer to me, and when she was only a few steps away, she stopped. "You've come, Thomas," she said, her voice soft but filled with coldness. "You can't turn back now." The suffocating feeling surged in me again. I couldn't understand what she had just said, but I knew I had no choice but to face her. I wanted to run, but my feet were nailed to the ground, unable to move. A part of me knew that I had been drawn into an ancient ritual, and now I was an inseparable part of it. The Ghost Bride didn't speak again, but extended her hand toward me. Suddenly, a sound rang out in the space, as if someone was strumming an old, worn-out harp. The black shadows began to ripple, sweeping past me, and I felt something cold brush against my body. Each of these shadows seemed like part of the souls who had died, those who couldn't find peace for some reason. They circled around me, as if waiting for something. "You will be the third," the Ghost Bride continued. "We cannot live without someone to replace us. My death was the beginning of it all, and now you will become a part of this ceremony." I didn't understand what she was saying, but I could feel an overwhelming fear. These souls, these faceless ghosts, they had been trapped in this village for how many years? And I, perhaps, was the one chosen to replace one of them. The feeling of being surrounded in this eerie space almost made me lose my mind. Everything around me seemed to be slowly splitting apart, turning into fragments of reality. I felt like I no longer controlled my own body. Cold winds cut into my skin, and I began to hear whispers, pleading words from the ghosts sliding past. "Help us," a faint voice whispered, but it was unclear. "We just want freedom." I tried to turn around, but I couldn't see anyone. Just endless darkness, just the sound of footsteps echoing in this space. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how this would end. But one thing was certain. I had been drawn into a loop with no way out. The ghost bride moved closer to me again, not to speak this time, but to simply stand there, staring at me. Her eyes were no longer empty. They were the eyes of a soul longing for freedom. She didn't say anything, but I could feel the fear rising within me, the hunger to break free from this scene. Then she reached out her hand toward me again. I couldn't resist. Everything in me was pulled toward her. When I touched her hand, I felt a cold, bone-chilling gust rush through my body. Suddenly, I heard a scream. But it didn't come from me. It came from the souls around me. When I looked down at my hand, I saw that it wasn't my own anymore, but the hands of the ghost bride, pale, cold skin. Everything around me started to fade away. The house, the ghosts, everything seemed to dissolve into the void, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. All I had left was one feeling. I couldn't escape this place. Story 5. When the coffin opens. After 12 o'clock, the souls that are awakened that summer. I was on vacation with a group of friends in a small town nestled in the western United States. This town, named Willow Creek, was famous for its ancient houses and mysterious tales that the locals whispered about whenever night fell. However, like all rumors, we thought they were just the figments of old people's imaginations. That is, until one night, I came to realize that some things cannot be explained by logic. On the first day of our vacation, we met a man named Richard, a stranger in the town who had lived there for many years, yet no one truly knew his past. Richard worked at a small roadside shop selling souvenirs and antiques, a place we had stopped by. He was a cheerful man, but his eyes always held a strange sadness, as though there was something he could never let go of. "What happened here?" I asked as I noticed an old photograph of an abandoned house next to the shop. The photo showed a huge house, long abandoned, its windows shattered, and the surroundings covered in a thick layer of dust. Richard smirked, his eyes gleaming strangely. "The locals here often talk about that house. They call it the Coffin House. Anyone who dares to enter after midnight will never return. You'll see things that no one could ever imagine." We didn't believe his story at the time, but a strange feeling lingered in our minds. Surely, Richard's tale had planted a curiosity in us that we couldn't shake off. So, on a moonless night, when the whole town was asleep, we decided to visit the house. The house was indeed a ruin, as if it had been abandoned for ages. The broken windows, creaking doors as the wind blew through, and the cold air that surrounded us were chilling. We entered, and every step echoed in the silence. A frightening stillness hung in the air, but we pressed on. In the living room, an old coffin lay in the middle of the room, covered by a black cloth. It was the coffin of someone Richard had mentioned had died in a car accident 10 years ago. Her name was Eleanor, a young woman who had died one dark night in an accident whose cause was unknown. The townspeople believed that Eleanor's spirit still lingered in the house, which is why they forbade anyone from opening the coffin after midnight. With curiosity and no fear, one of my friends, Tom, decided to do what we all thought was a prank. "We'll record a video and show everyone," he said. "We'll prove this is just a bunch of nonsense." Tom walked up to the coffin, holding his phone to record. "All right, everyone, get ready. Let's open this coffin," he said with an excited tone. What happened next was a haunting scene. Tom slowly opened the coffin lid, and in that instant, the flashlight's beam illuminated the dead woman's face. Eleanor's eyes slowly opened, as if in a lifelike gaze. Then she smiled, a smile that was both terrifying and eerie. Her eyes locked onto the camera lens, as if staring directly at Tom, at us. But right after that, Tom's phone slipped from his hand, and the screen went pitch black, like an endless abyss. The air in the house grew heavy, as though something was drawing closer to us. "We need to go now," I screamed, fear surging through me. But as we turned to run toward the door, Tom didn't keep up. He had vanished. We searched the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. The front door slammed shut by itself, and everything around us fell eerily silent. We didn't dare go back inside, and just then, my phone rang. "We found Tom." It was a strange voice, not anyone from our group. "He's lying on the bed in Eleanor's room. He can't leave. But don't worry, someone will come to help." The next day, Tom didn't return, and no one in town spoke about what had happened that night. I didn't know what to do, but I felt that I couldn't let it go. The story of the coffin was kept hidden, and I began to realize a terrifying truth. Some things should never be disturbed. Secrets, no matter how buried, always find a way to resurface. And I understood that if we weren't careful, we might be the next ones. The next day, I couldn't escape the horrifying images from the night before. The scene of Tom standing facing the coffin, the dim light casting shadows on Eleanor's face, her wide-open eyes and cold gaze as if she wanted to pierce through every layer of space. Most haunting of all was the strange smile, one I still couldn't forget. It felt like a warning, a sign that we had made an irreversible mistake. After leaving the haunted house, none of us dared to speak to anyone in town about what had happened. The feeling, the sensation of witnessing things that the mind couldn't comprehend, grew more terrifying as time passed. I no longer dared to call or text anyone in the group. Tom had disappeared, and no one could explain why. But inevitably, I had to return. The guilt, the obsession, weighed heavily on my mind. I couldn't let it end like this. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't just stand by and watch my best friend disappear without doing anything. So, on a late, dark night, I decided to return to that house again. This time I wasn't going alone. I brought a camera, hoping to capture everything, if possible, to uncover the reason behind Tom's mysterious disappearance. I told myself I wouldn't go into the room with the coffin. I would stay outside and only record what happened. When I arrived at the house, everything seemed normal. The shattered windows and the overgrown trees around the house looked as if they had been abandoned for years. Only a few stray cats wandered around, searching for food. I had to force myself to believe that everything would be fine. As I entered, the air was still cold, silent, and there was no one around. But when I stepped into the living room, a wave of terror hit me. The coffin was still there, unchanged from the night before. But this time, something was different. A piece of paper lay on the lid of the coffin. The paper was written in red ink, the handwriting smudged as if someone had hurriedly written it. I picked up the paper, trembling as I read the words, "Never open the coffin after midnight, or you will pay the price." My heart raced. The feeling of something unexplainable began to overwhelm me. Something very strange was happening, and I could sense the presence of something in the darkness. Suddenly, my phone rang. I jumped back, taking a few steps away. The screen displayed Tom's name. I couldn't believe my eyes. How was he calling me? Hadn't he disappeared? Without hesitation, I answered. But all I could hear was heavy breathing on the other end, as though someone was standing very close to me. I tried to speak, but there was no response. The breathing continued, thick and labored. Then a voice, not Tom's, spoke. "Don't come back. It has seen you." The sudden warning sent chills through me. I froze, unsure of what to do. My eyes were fixed on the coffin. The lid seemed to shift, as if some force was moving it from within. I couldn't take my eyes off it. A strange noise came from inside the house, as if someone was walking up behind me. I turned around, but saw no one. Only the silent space and the coldness that surrounded me. It felt as though a cold breeze brushed past me, making me shiver. Then suddenly, laughter echoed. It wasn't the laughter of a human, but rather a strange sound, one I couldn't place. And then I saw it. From the darkness in the corner of the room, a figure slowly emerged. It was a woman, her long hair cascading down, her face unclear, but her eyes, those eyes, cold and filled with hatred. It was Eleanor. She stood there, staring at me, a terrible smile on her face, the same one I had seen in the video the previous day. But this time, the smile was no longer innocent and haunting. It had become something far more terrifying, as if she was scornful of my existence. I rushed toward the door, trying to escape the house. But as I got close, the door slammed shut, refusing to open. I turned to look, and Eleanor's gaze was still fixed on me, as if she was following every step I took. "Where are you going?" The voice came from behind, not from Eleanor's mouth, but from somewhere deep within the house. In overwhelming fear, I began to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the deadly silence of the space. It felt as if something was tightening around me, making it hard to breathe. Finally, I saw Tom's figure, standing faintly in the corner of the room. He was still alive, but he wasn't the Tom I once knew. His face had turned pale, his eyes hollow. His lips moved, but only labored breathing came out. "Keep opening the coffin," he whispered. "Keep opening it, and you will see everything." The light from my phone began to dim, and the darkness in the house grew heavier. I realized I couldn't go back anymore. What had begun now only had one path: to run. But could I escape? When I woke up, I couldn't remember how I had left the house. Everything felt like a dark blur in my mind, as if someone had taken away my memory. I wasn't in that house anymore. I was in a hospital. The white light from the ceiling lamps made me feel like I was sinking into a nightmare full of haunting images. I sat up, my head throbbing and my throat dry. In no time, a nurse entered, her face filled with concern. "You're awake. You passed out when you went outside. Was anyone with you?" she asked, her voice gentle yet full of suspicion. "No?" "No one," I replied, my voice hoarse, breath shallow. I couldn't talk about the house, couldn't tell her what I had seen, what had happened. The cold feeling in my chest made me tremble uncontrollably. Suddenly, a dry cough forced me to stop. At that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one affected by the events of that night. My fears had started to spread. It felt like something had followed me since I left that house. The cold stares, the strange laughter still echoed in my mind, impossible to shake off. What scared me even more was Tom. He had vanished after I left, but what I witnessed that night still haunted me. Tom was no longer himself. The person I saw in that house wasn't the friend I once knew. His eyes were empty, lifeless, and his last words, "Keep opening the coffin," had kept me from looking back again. I couldn't stay in the hospital any longer. Although the doctor advised me to rest and recover, something inside me urged me to return to that house, to uncover the truth. I couldn't live in fear forever. I had to find Tom. I had to answer the question, why is he like this? And then I made the decision to go back. That day, I went to Willow Creek once again. This time, I wasn't alone. I had found another friend, a freelance detective named Marcus, who I had known through an old friend. He seemed familiar with strange cases, and I needed someone experienced to help me unravel what was happening. "We need to get to the root of this. We can't just stand by and watch," Marcus said, his gaze determined and decisive. He didn't believe in ghost stories or spirits, but he believed in the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. We arrived at the house in the late afternoon. The scene was unchanged, but as soon as I stepped over the threshold, I felt a familiar sensation envelop me. Cold, terrifying, and heavy. I swallowed hard, not wanting to face the haunting memories, but I knew I had to. Marcus and I stepped into the living room, where the coffin was still there. Nothing had changed. But this time, the piece of paper with the red writing I had seen the day before was no longer on the coffin. Instead, on the floor near the coffin, there was something. A CD, neatly placed, as though someone had intentionally left it there for me. Marcus looked at me. I looked at him. A cold feeling rose in my chest. "Don't pick it up," I said, my voice faltering. "Don't do it." But Marcus, with his curious nature and determination, stepped forward and picked up the CD. He held it in his hand and ran his fingers over its surface, as if trying to figure something out. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the house, and the lights in the room went out. The space was engulfed by complete darkness, and I heard footsteps, light steps, as though someone was moving through the darkness around us. I screamed as I heard whispers in the air, raspy breathing, eerie laughter. That feeling came again, making it hard for me to breathe. What is happening?" Marcus yelled, hurriedly turning on the flashlight in his hand. But the light from the flashlight only made the darkness thicker, as though some force was swallowing everything. Then I saw it. A blurry figure standing in the middle of the room. Its face indistinct, but its eyes still shining brightly in the dark. Those eyes were cold, lifeless, as though they were seeing deep into my mind. It was Eleanor, but this time she didn't stand still. She moved, advancing toward us step by step, slowly, deliberately. "Run!" I screamed, no longer able to stay calm. I grabbed Marcus's hand and pulled him to run outside, but as we reached the door, we couldn't open it. The door refused to move, as if some invisible force was holding it shut. The darkness surged again, and I didn't know if Marcus and I would ever escape this house. The laughter, the footsteps still echoed in my mind. This time, we weren't just facing a ghost. We were confronting a curse. Story S6, The Return of the Ghost Dogs. I arrived at Owl's Nest on an October afternoon when the fog began to creep through the old pine trees as if to bury the only dirt road leading into town. My car was old, with a suspension system long overdue for maintenance, creaking every time I hit a pothole. But I didn't mind. I was a freelance journalist, and Owl's Nest, with its mysterious rumors, was the kind of story I needed to make a name for myself. Owl's Nest was a small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, far from any modern city. With a population of less than 200, the first thing that caught my attention when I arrived was the silence. No dogs barking, not a single one. No distant barks from porches, no jingling of chains in backyards. Just the wind howling through the mountain pass and the sound of dry leaves crunching under the wheels. I stopped my car in front of the old inn, Black Feather Inn, the only place still open for strangers. The innkeeper was an elderly woman with white hair and a face as if it had been cut by the mountain winds hundreds of times. Her name was Martha Greer. I asked her directly, "Does no one here own dogs?" She stopped wiping a cracked china cup and looked at me as if I had just asked if anyone still worshipped demons. Her gaze slowly dropped, and she said only one thing: "Dogs see things they shouldn't see." I'm not easily scared, but her voice, low, hoarse, and hollow as if echoing from a stone cavern, sent a chill down my spine. That night, as I sat taking notes in my room, I suddenly realized I didn't hear anything. No TV from the next room, no scurrying mice, no distant dogs. I turned on the flashlight and stepped outside onto the porch, observing for hours just to confirm. Not a single animal in sight. The next day, I walked through the town, taking notes, snapping photos. What struck me as odd was that in places where there had been signs of dog ownership, old cages, rusted chains, scattered stainless steel bowls, all of them had been abandoned. Some cages had deep scratch marks on the wooden doors, as though the animals inside had been frantically desperate. At the town's only grocery store, I tried my luck with the storekeeper, an old man named Arthur Delaney. "Tell me, what happened to the dogs?" I asked. Arthur looked up, staring out the window, as if he was listening to something I couldn't hear. He mumbled, "They howled, like people crying in the woods. Then they bit off their own tongues. They took their own lives. No dog ever survived more than 3 nights after moving into this town." I laughed, thinking he was telling a ghost story. But Arthur didn't laugh. He just placed an old photo on the table. In the photo, there was a golden hunting dog, its eyes wide open in terror, covered in blood. The tongue had been nearly severed. That night I decided to do what no one here dared to do. I drove down to the nearby town where there was a small animal shelter. I picked out a husky pup named Shadow. Obedient, quick-witted, and especially loyal. I brought it back to Owl's Nest, sneaking around like I was smuggling contraband. For the first 3 nights, everything seemed fine. Shadow ate well, wagged its tail when I called. But on the 4th night, things changed. Shadow began growling at the dark corner of the room, where there was nothing but an old wooden cabinet. It howled long, mournful howls, like cries of despair. When I stepped closer, I noticed 2 long scratch marks on the wooden floor, claw marks, leading from the door out to the balcony, then stopping abruptly. By midnight, I was awakened by a sound, like claws scraping the walls. I jumped out of bed and saw Shadow curled up, its body convulsing. It howled one final painful cry, then headbutted the leg of the table like a mad animal. Then suddenly, it opened its mouth and bit deeply into its own tongue until it bled. I held it, screaming for help, but it was too late. Shadow let out one final groan, then lay still, its eyes wide open, staring into the void. The next morning, when I placed Shadow's body in front of the porch, Martha was already standing there. "I warned you," she said in a flat voice. Why did this happen?" I choked out. She didn't answer. She only bent down, placed a dried-up wildflower next to Shadow's body, then turned away. But I heard her mumble, "They see, and they reflect. What is to come?" That night, I dreamed of dogs. Hundreds, thousands of them, with glowing red eyes, howling in the woods. Behind them was a figure, tall, covered in black fur, with dozens of eyes on its face, all staring at me. Then, I saw myself, howling, screaming among the pack of dogs. I woke up drenched in sweat, and the first thing I heard was the sound of scratching at the door. From outside the balcony. Claws, heavy breathing. A howl, but it wasn't from a dog. I left my bed while it was still misty outside, my mind haunted by the strange howling from the night before. The sounds seemed to echo from my own mind. Not the howl of a dog, nor entirely a human voice. Something. Not of this world. The balcony was empty. No trace. No animal, no claw marks on the wood, as I had clearly heard before. I tried to reassure myself with some dreamy reasoning, but deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. When I went downstairs, the reception desk was empty. No sign of Martha. The cold coffee cup was still sitting on the table, with steam faintly rising from the rim, as if she had just left a few minutes ago. I knocked on her door, but no one answered. I walked around to the back of the inn, where there was a small garden and an old shed. The shed door was ajar. The cold wind made it creak. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was pitch dark. The musty smell, mixed with the scent of old rotten meat, filled the air. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and scanned the room. It was a dusty space with wooden boxes and old furniture. But in one corner, I saw something I wished I had never seen. A rusted metal cage. On the bars, dried blood had formed a crust. Inside the cage was a bowl, still containing some unfinished dog food, and a collar, engraved with the name Rusty. There was no dog in the cage, but around the cage, the floor was scratched up. Bloodstains, drag marks, and a claw mark, crescent-shaped, deep enough to leave an imprint in the wood. I stepped back, trembling. The feeling that someone, or something, was standing behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Yet outside the shed, where the faint light filtered through the tree branches, something moved. A shadow. Long, unnatural. I went back into the inn and called the town police. There was only one small office with one officer on duty, Deputy Kyle Brenner. He arrived about 20 minutes later, driving an old pickup truck with the town logo. I told him everything. The howling, Shadow's death, Martha's disappearance, the cage in the shed. Kyle listened intently, but his face grew tense when I mentioned the name Rusty. "You really saw that collar?" he asked, his voice lowering. "I have a photo," I said, showing him my phone. He stared at it for a long time, then sighed. Rusty was her dog. It died 16 years ago. No one dared go near the shed after it. Went mad, bit its own throat, but the cage, it was burned. I remember it well. I set it on fire myself at Martha's request. I looked at him, my mind spinning. Then, what did I see? Kyle didn't answer. He just gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze fixed on the woods behind the inn. Owl's Nest never gives up what it has swallowed. We decided to search the area around the inn. On the hillside, not far from there, stood an old wooden house surrounded by a rusty barbed wire fence. Martha had mentioned that it used to be an old mission station, abandoned since the 1960s. When we stepped inside, the air immediately thickened, like there was a mist the eyes couldn't see. On the rotting wooden walls, chalky writings remained. Heed not their call. Dogs are the mirrors. Don't let them howl beyond the third night. Eyes in the woods, eyes in the mirror. I shuddered. Kyle stood still, then pointed to the room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar. When we pushed it open, we found an empty room with dozens of dog collars hanging on the wall. Each one was numbered, and underneath was a crude drawing, not of dogs, but of humans, transforming, growing fur, howling. In the middle of the room was an old bed, and lying on it was Martha. She was not alive, but there were no signs of injury or harm to her body. Her face was calm, her eyes wide open, and her mouth agape, as if she were howling. Inside her mouth was a dog's tongue covered in blood. Kyle retched in the corner. I sank to the floor, my hands trembling. There was no explanation. The wall behind the bed had a large crack, like a passage leading down to a cellar. But it was sealed with boards and cement. Kyle was about to call for backup, but I stopped him. "Wait, there's something deeper. This cellar isn't marked on the town map." That night I couldn't sleep. I reviewed the photo of the collars, the strange symbols, and then thought about the old dream, the pack of dogs, and the shadow with dozens of eyes. I turned on my laptop and searched through old archives. In the local newspaper archives from the 1940s, I found a brief snippet. Police found 14 dead dogs in Owl's Nest Valley. Locals reported hearing strange howling for 3 nights prior. No one dared leave their homes. One woman went missing. Never found. The woman's name, Martha Greer, 24 years old. I collapsed back in my chair. My head was spinning. If that was Martha, then who have I been meeting these past few days? Or more accurately, what is it? I returned to Blackfeather Inn just as night was falling. The wind howled through the old pine trees like the groaning of wandering souls. Owl's Nest was no longer just a town. It had become a living entity, breathing through the wind, whispering with the howls, and watching me. From somewhere in the darkness, I couldn't sleep. How could I, when the images of Martha, or whatever it was that took her shape, were still burned deep into my mind? The gaping mouth, the blood-drenched tongue, and those eyes, wide open, as if seeing something beyond human comprehension. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, until my gaze landed on the mirror mounted on the wooden cabinet against the wall. A mirror half my height, with a rusted iron frame, looking as if it had been there for ages. But the strange thing was, Ever since I arrived, I had never noticed it. It was as if it had only just appeared. I sat up and walked over to it. The mirror was covered by a thick black cloth, pinned tightly along the edges, as if someone didn't want it uncovered. My instinct told me to leave it alone, but curiosity, as always, won out. I slowly removed the pins, and the cloth fell away, revealing the mirror. But it wasn't an ordinary mirror. It didn't reflect clearly. Everything in it was blurred, like ripples on a stream. And then, through the mist in the mirror, I saw a shadow. Not me, not anyone in the room. The shadow was unstable in shape, its head unnaturally long, and its eyes glowing brightly, unmoving. It was standing behind me. I turned around. No one. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was gone. The next morning, I called Kyle. He arrived within an hour, still in his old, worn-out uniform, his sidearm at his hip, and a tired expression that suggested he no longer believed in anything. I told him about the mirror. He wasn't surprised. He simply nodded. "There's a reason everyone around here covers the mirrors," he said, pulling a stack of old photos from his jacket. Black and white shots, taken with a Kodak film camera in the 70s. I flipped through them. Each photo showed a room with a mirror, and in the mirror were things that shouldn't have been there. A dog howling while its owner stood still, a horned shadow behind a little girl, a vague shape placing a hand on the photographer's shoulder. Goosebumps crawled up my skin. "The mirror is a window," Kyle said. "A window to what? A window between this world and that one. And dogs are the only creatures who can see both sides." We returned to the abandoned house where we found Martha's body. The basement door was still sealed shut. Kyle brought a crowbar. I didn't want to go down, but I had to. This story was no longer just about Owl's Nest. It was pulling me in. After prying off the wooden planks, the smell of mold and old blood flooded out like an invisible wave. We used our flashlights to peer inside. The basement was deep, narrow, and descended like a shark's jaw. Each step creaked underfoot, and the air grew colder. Not the natural kind of cold, but the cold of death, as if the air had been frozen by a wandering spirit. At the bottom, there was a round room with stone walls and no windows. In the center of the room was a massive mirror, more than 2 meters tall, its black metal frame engraved with strange symbols. In front of the mirror were dozens of dog collars, neatly arranged like offerings. Carl whispered, "This is where they used to perform the rituals." I asked, "Who?" He didn't answer, only shined his flashlight at the ceiling. On the ceiling, painted in something dry and thick like blood, was a giant eye with a spiral iris. Beneath it were scribbled words. "Howling opens the door. Reflection guides the way." Just then, the mirror shuddered. There was no wind. No one touched it. But I swear, it shook. I stepped back. Kyle reached out to stop me. "Don't look at it too long." "Why?" I asked. He whispered, "Because it will look back." We left the basement, sealing it shut again. Kyle intended to seal it with cement, but I stopped him. "I need proof." He shook his head, exhausted. "You don't understand. Owl's Nest isn't a place to investigate. It's a place to stay away from." That night, I dreamt again. I saw myself standing in the mirror room, and the mirror no longer reflected me. Instead, there was a girl. Long hair, white dress, howling like a dog. Her eyes were wide open, her tongue dripping with blood, and behind her, hundreds of eyes stared at me from the darkness. Then a voice rang out, not a human voice, but a howl in the language of demons. The gate is open. One has looked. That one is prey. I woke up with a start, my body soaked in sweat. The mirror in my room no longer had the cloth covering it, and on the surface of the mirror, through the misty marks like condensation, was a trace of claw marks. I didn't leave my room all day. The mirror still stood there, lifeless, silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew the faint claw marks were not an illusion. There were 5 deep, evenly spaced lines, like the paws of a dog. But the claws were longer and more curved than any animal I had ever seen. I had taken pictures. I had made notes. I had reviewed the footage from the small camera I always carried on my investigations. The tape recorded the first 6 hours. Then it went blank. When the footage resumed, I was lying motionless on the bed. But the mirror reflected me, sitting and staring at myself in the mirror. I remembered nothing. Kyle arrived in the late afternoon. He knocked 3 times. I peered through the peephole and saw him standing there, holding an old leather bag. His eyes were no longer frantic but weighed down, like he had given up hope that everything would end peacefully. "Tonight is the 3rd night," he said as soon as I opened the door. I nodded, not asking more. I knew what the 3rd night meant. It always started with howling, and it ended with loss. We sat in the kitchen, all the lights off except for the small flickering candle. Kyle placed the bag on the table, opened it, and took out a worn leather journal. "My great-grandfather's diary," he said. "He was the sheriff here in the 1930s. I opened the book. The pages yellowed, the handwriting shaky. Some lines I couldn't read, blurred by ink or scratched out. But what remained was enough to create a nightmare with a true form. November 3rd, 1934. The Griffith baby died after the dog howled 3 nights in a row. Its body was not intact. Eyes gouged out, tongue ripped out and left in the dog's water bowl. November 7th. We filled the cellar under the old church. There's a mirror down there. Those who approach begin to howl like dogs. They are no longer human. November 10th. The howling still continues. I've started seeing shadows in the mirror. The pack of dogs in my dreams chase me. But I don't run. I howl back. I let the journal drop from my hands, palms cold as ice. Kyle looked up and said, "That's why they killed all the dogs in the village. Not because they were afraid of them, but because they were the warning. The dogs weren't haunted. They were just the speakers, howling before the other comes." I silently asked, "Then, what happens if there are no dogs?" Kyle gave a dry laugh. "Then someone else has to howl in their place." That night the sky seemed to drop down to the earth. Black clouds covered everything. The moon completely obscured. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and cold blood. We locked all the windows, taped up every exposed mirror. I sprinkled salt around the door to my room. My mother once told me, salt keeps wandering souls away. I wasn't sure what was real or superstitious anymore, but I would do everything I could. 11:47 p.m., the first howl rang out from the woods, long, hoarse, and painful. 12:03 a.m., the second howl came, right under the porch. I rushed to the window, nothing in sight, but the bathroom mirror had been uncovered. No one inside had done that. 12:37 a.m. The third howl call came from inside my head, not from my ears, not from the sky. I heard it from within myself. I collapsed, clutching my head. In my ears, I could hear scratching, heavy breathing, the sound of claws scraping the wooden floor, and amid the chaotic noises, my own howl. Kyle shook me awake, but his face was pale. Someone is standing outside. We left the room, carrying flashlights and guns. The light swept across the fence. The wind rustled the leaves. But in the moment the light passed over, I saw a woman, long hair, a white dress, eyes black as night, and her mouth was wide open, as though she was screaming. But there was no sound. It was the girl I had seen in the mirror the night before. Kyle raised his gun, but I screamed, holding his hand, "Don't shoot! She's not real!" Then she disappeared. No trace. We returned to the house, locked the door. But everything had changed. The air was thick, as though something was crawling through the wooden cracks. In the mirror, I saw a dog. No, not a dog. It was me, bent down, on all fours, howling. My eyes were glowing red. My mouth wide open, teeth long. My tongue hanging out and shredded. I turned away. Kyle whispered, "You've been chosen." I asked again, "Chosen for what?" "To howl in their place." Urishi Taha 12 a.m. The final howl rang out. Then, silence. A dark shadow crawled out of the mirror, not with a body, but through the reflection. It didn't touch the ground, didn't collide with anything. But I saw it clearly. It slithered across the floor like a furry creature, but it was tall enough to reach the ceiling. I stood frozen. Kyle fired. 3 shots. Nothing happened. The shadow silently stopped in front of me, and then it dissolved into the air, but I knew it hadn't left. The next morning, Kyle was gone. No trace, no blood, no struggle. Only one thing, a dog collar engraved with the name Kyle, placed right in the middle of the living room. I cried, not because I was scared, but because I understood. He had howled in my place, but the mirror was still there. And in the mirror, my reflection had 2 glowing red eyes. Story 7. The White Shadow on the Rooftop. I moved into the Ashwood Heights apartment building on a late October day when the autumn winds began to bring a chill that slipped through every crack in the old windows. The building stood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, with its faded paint and windows that remained silent, like eyes too accustomed to stillness. I chose this place because the rent was strangely cheap compared to the average. Perhaps that's why the residents here rarely spoke to each other. They moved like shadows, quietly passing one another in the hallways. No one looking at anyone for more than 3 seconds. My apartment was on the 6th floor, right below the rooftop. When I moved in, the building manager, an elderly woman named Greta, handed me the key and warned, "The rooftop is off limits to residents. Don't go up there, no matter what anyone tells you." I just laughed, thinking she was being overly cautious. But the look in her eyes when she said that, something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just a warning, but something deeper. A fear that had become a habit. The first week passed normally. I worked remotely, typing away in my cold apartment, listening to the wind howling through the windows. But by the first full moon night, and to be honest, I wouldn't have noticed if my Vietnamese neighbor on the 3rd floor hadn't mentioned it, things began to feel strange. That night, near midnight, I heard soft footsteps above my head, like the sound of wooden clocks. Light, slow, 1 step at a time. The rooftop was supposed to be off limits. I opened the door, looking up at the ceiling. Silent, but the footsteps continued. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The elevator had stopped working by 10 p.m., so I climbed the spiral staircase that led to the rooftop. On the way up, I met Tom, a middle-aged man who lived on the 5th floor. He shook his head when he saw me. "You shouldn't. The 13th night. You shouldn't go up there." I asked him again, but he just turned and hurried down the stairs. As though fleeing from something unnameable, the rooftop door was locked. But when I arrived, the door was slightly ajar. A small crack, as if someone had passed through and left it open. I hesitated, gripping the flashlight. A cold breeze swept past my neck, carrying the scent of mold and something that smelled like burnt hair. I pushed the door open. There was nothing. A bare concrete patio, the distant sound of car horns. But on the right side, near the water tank, I saw a figure. A girl, wearing a white audi, her long hair reaching her back. She stood with her back to me, motionless, silent. Her black hair hung down, still as though unaffected by the wind. "Are you okay?" I spoke, my voice hoarse. No response. I took a step back. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but before I could turn away, she tilted her head. Not exactly turning. It was more like tilting. Her neck bent unnaturally to one side at a sharp angle, as if it had been broken. And in that moment, I saw, reflected in the glass of the water tank behind her, her face. No eyes, no nose, just a mouth split wide from ear to ear, stretched as though cut with a razor. I screamed and ran. That night I couldn't sleep. Under the harsh yellow light of the living room, I opened my computer's webcam, wanting to check if I had just imagined everything. But the first thing I saw on the screen was my own face, upside down. It wasn't a real image, but a reflection. The webcam showed me sitting upright, but the mirror behind me, the small one attached to the wall, showed my head hanging upside down, eyes wide, mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I turned my head. The mirror was normal, but on the webcam, I saw myself slowly creeping closer from behind. I turned off the computer, unplugged the cable, covered the mirror with a cloth. Since that night, I never looked at a mirror for too long again. The next morning, I knocked on the door of apartment 303. My Vietnamese neighbor, Ms. Ha, had lived here for almost 10 years. I briefly told her about what happened last night, hoping to find some explanation. She looked at me, her face paling. "You saw it, didn't you? The shadow in the white Audi on the rooftop?" I nodded. Years ago, this place used to be a nursing home for elderly Asians. There was a girl. She had a mental illness. People say, every month, on the 13th night of the lunar calendar, she would wear a white Audi and go up to the rooftop, standing with her back to the city, waiting for her mother to come pick her up. But her mother had died long ago. "Did she jump?" I asked softly. Ms. Ha shook her head. "No, she was pushed. There's a rumor that a security guard raped her and then pushed her off the roof to cover up the crime. A few weeks later, he died in the security room, his neck twisted as if it had been wrung by an invisible force. That night, I nailed all the mirrors in the apartment shut, but something still felt wrong. Around 2 a.m., I was woken by a faint laugh coming from the rooftop. I listened once again, the sound of wooden clocks, and this time I distinctly heard a whisper from behind the bathroom mirror, the one I had covered with black cloth. You've seen my face now. So, switch places. I stayed up all night, curled up on the couch, staring at the black cloth covering the mirror in the bathroom as if it could fall off at any moment. The faint noises from the walls, the ceiling, or the hallway, things I had never paid attention to before, suddenly seemed suspicious, as if someone was lurking, breathing quietly behind the wall, waiting. The next morning, I called an old friend, Janelle, who is currently a research assistant in the psychology department at PSU. She had once mentioned phenomena related to reflective hallucinations connected to dissociative disorders and hypnosis. I recounted what had happened, hoping to find a more scientific explanation, something I could believe, so I could convince myself I hadn't gone crazy. Seeing images in the mirror that don't match your real self is a common phenomenon in experiences of disconnection from reality, Janelle said over the phone, but her voice was uncertain. But the head twisting backward and the mouth stretching into a smile that wide sounds like some creepypasta on Reddit. I wish it were just creepypasta, I whispered, glancing toward the bathroom. Janelle sighed. All right, I'll come over tonight. I want to see it for myself. That night, it rained. Portland's autumn was usually cold, but tonight's rain made the air thick like mud. When Janelle arrived, she brought a digital camera, some black cloth, and an old book about mirrors in Asian folklore. It sounds crazy, but these things have been seriously documented, she said as she opened the book, pointing to a passage translated from Vietnamese. People believe that mirrors are gateways between two worlds. If someone dies unjustly and their soul hasn't passed on, they can pull someone else into the mirror to take their place so they can escape. I froze. The girl in the white Audi. If she really did die unjustly on the rooftop, and the mirror is the only place that reflects her true face, then you're becoming the target. Because I saw her face, I said, as if reading a verdict. Janelle set up the camera, facing the bathroom mirror. We removed the black cloth. The mirror looked normal, reflecting the two of us standing in the small damp room. But when the camera started recording, Janelle suddenly went quiet. Why, in the camera, you're smiling? I turned to the camera. My heart skipped a beat. In the screen, I, the reflection, stood motionless like a statue, my head tilted sharply to the right, my mouth curving into a pale smile, while I, the real me, stood there, staring blankly, unmoving. Janelle, turn it off. Hold on. I want to try something. She moved closer, standing between me and the mirror, then said, if anyone is on the other side, give us a sign. Everything went completely silent, until a small tap echoed from the ceiling. We looked up. A tiny crack had appeared in the corner of the tile. Very thin, but I was sure it hadn't been there this morning. That spot is right below the rooftop, I said, shuddering. Janelle stayed the night. I let her sleep in the bedroom while I stayed in the living room. But around 3 a.m., I was awoken by the sound of a door opening. Click, the bathroom door. I held my breath. I didn't jump up immediately. I just listened. Footsteps, not Janelle's. These footsteps were light, dragging, with the faint sound of wooden clogs tapping against the tiled floor. I turned my head and saw the bathroom door wide open, the mirror no longer covered. And in it was me, standing, with my back turned. I, the reflection, was wearing a white dress, my hair hanging down, motionless in the middle of the bathroom, with my back to the room. Then suddenly, the figure in the mirror began to turn, but not like a normal person. Its head twisted first, as if the neck had been wrenched 180 degrees. I screamed for Janelle. She rushed out, turned on the lights. Everything disappeared. The mirror returned to normal, but Janelle didn't say anything. She quietly walked back to the room, packed her things, and said, "I can't stay here anymore. You have to leave this apartment." "I can't." I shook my head. "I think I'm being targeted now." The next 3 days were filled with occurrences that kept me awake. The electricity in the house flickered. The lights in the bathroom turned on by themselves, even though I had turned off the switch. I tried taping the entire mirror shut, but by morning, the tape had peeled off, as if someone from the inside had scratched it. I went to see Mrs. Greta. "You know what's happening, don't you?" I asked, almost pleading. She looked at me for a long time, then spoke slowly. She was the daughter of the old manager. Her name was Lynn. She was raped and then died before she turned 18. Her body was never found, only her blood-stained Audai. Her mother went mad, and every 13th night of the lunar month, she would go up to the rooftop, calling for her daughter in vain, until she jumped and killed herself. She paused for a moment. No one dares to go to the rooftop anymore. Every year, someone sees Lynn standing there with her back turned, but no one dares to look at her face. I swallowed hard. "Is there any way to make her stop? You have to sever the mirror. You have to make sure she can't use the glass as a door anymore." I returned, preparing to hammer the entire mirror in the house. But just as I raised the hammer, the phone rang. It was Janelle. But when I answered, all I could hear was breathing, a soft, quiet sigh, then a whisper. "I've replaced her. You are next." The phone fell from my hand. The screen still showed the call was ongoing, but the name displayed was no longer Janelle's. It was Lynn, rooftop. Since the eerie phone call from the caller ID labeled Lynn, rooftop, I could no longer tell what was real and what was an illusion. In my head, that voice still echoed, cold as the night mist crawling down my throat. "I've replaced her. You are next." Janelle was gone. I called incessantly. No answer. I went to her apartment. The door was still locked. The neighbors said they hadn't seen her since 2 nights ago. The police were called, but only I knew, or dared to believe, that Janelle had been replaced, and what was living in her apartment was no longer my friend. I started packing, not to leave, but to find. A part of me believed that to end this, I had to find its root. I had to face it. I tore through the kitchen, opened every drawer, every small crack in the apartment, and behind the wall behind the fridge, I found an old rusty tin box. Inside was a bundle of yellowed papers, written in a shaky hand. It was in Vietnamese. I had to use a translation app to understand it fully, and each line made my heart stop. My daughter, Lynn, was humiliated by him. I begged them not to let him keep working here. But they were silent. They silenced me with money. I couldn't let Lynn die unjustly. I went to the rooftop with her on the 13th of the lunar month. I dressed her in a white dress and called him up there. I read the last line again. I pushed Lynn down myself. I couldn't stand that painful look in her eyes every day anymore. The writing stopped there. No signature. But I knew. It was Lynn's mother, the woman who went mad and then killed herself. Mrs. Greta had said so. But if it was Lynn's mother who pushed her, Then who was the one who raped Lynn? I confronted Mrs. Greta that afternoon. In the small, dimly lit management office, the smell of old cigarettes and mold surrounded her like a gloomy fog. I know you lied. The one who raped Lynn wasn't the guard. Who was it? Mrs. Greta sat still, her hand trembling slightly on the table. She didn't look at me. I pulled out the papers and slammed them onto the wooden desk. You knew Lynn's mother pushed her, and you know who ruined Lynn's life. Mrs. Greta slowly raised her hand to cover her mouth. Then, after a long silence, she exhaled, her voice hoarse, as if it was being squeezed from her chest. It was the former manager, Mr. Henry Cross, the investor of Ashwood Heights, also Lynn's godfather. Is he still alive? I asked. She shook her head. He disappeared right after Lynn died. No one found his body. They say he ran away. But I think Lynn pulled him away. That night, I decided to return to the rooftop. Not out of curiosity, but because I believed. Lynn never wanted to harm an innocent. She was searching for someone, or something, that was still trapped. I brought a recorder, a small handheld mirror, and a string of Buddhist beads that Janelle had left in her coat pocket. I wasn't religious, but at that moment, I was willing to believe in anything. The rooftop door opened just like before. The same cold wind with the scent of burning hair. The crescent moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale silver light on the water tank and the mottled moss stains. I stepped out. No one was there. Lynn, I called, my voice trembling. I'm not here to hurt you. I know you were betrayed by your own flesh and blood. No reply, but the atmosphere changed. It felt as if the space itself had contracted. I took the small mirror and held it up. And in the reflection, I saw her long hair, soaked and hanging down her shoulders, a tattered white dress. Her eyes, devoid of irises, just two empty sockets, but in them was pain, pleading, a soul that couldn't leave. You don't have to take anyone else, I whispered. I'll help you. The recorder in my pocket emitted a screeching noise. No one had turned it on, but that sound wasn't radio static. It was a voice. He is still in the mirror. I froze. It wasn't Lynn killing people. It was Henry Cross, that evil soul, trapped in the mirror, manipulating those who had seen Lynn, driving them mad, pulling them into the mirrored world where he was the master. I ran home like a madwoman. I had to destroy the mirror, all of them. But I was one step too late. The mirror in the bathroom was shattered, not from the outside, but from the inside. The shards of glass fell, revealing a black, hollow surface like skin peeled from bone. And in it, I saw Janelle. She screamed silently, her hands beating against the glass, her eyes rolling back in her head. Behind her was a man in a suit, his face melted like wax, placing a hand on her shoulder. His gaze locked directly on me. I screamed, stepped back. The mirror exploded. After that night, I moved out of Ashwood Heights. I never returned. Never. But one night, while driving past the old neighborhood, I glanced up at the rooftop. The full moon, and by the water tank, the girl in the white dress was standing there, her back to me. But this time, when I looked in the rear-view mirror, she wasn't turned away anymore. She was smiling. Story 8. The Double Mirror Game. I used to think that the spirit summoning game was just some silly thing high school kids came up with during power outages or camping trips in the woods. But when I witnessed what happened to my cousin, I couldn't laugh anymore. My name is Daniel. I was 19 at the time. studying at a community college in Oregon. The story begins in the fall of 2022, when I moved in with my Aunt Lucy's family in a small town called Grantville. A cold, foggy place that was nearly covered in mist all day long, and especially unsettlingly quiet. My cousin Olivia, 16, was quiet, dreamy, and particularly fascinated by strange things: tarot, astrology, urban legends, and most recently, the spirit summoning games on TikTok. One Saturday night, while Aunt Lucy was working the night shift at the hospital and Uncle Mike was out on duty, Olivia asked me to play a new game. She called the double mirror game. All you need are two mirrors facing each other. Turn off the lights, light a candle, and ask the right question. If it works, you'll see another version of yourself. It might answer things you're too afraid to ask anyone else. I laughed, thinking she was joking. But Olivia didn't. She looked at me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. The basement bedroom. We sneaked two large mirrors, one from the bathroom, one from the hallway. Olivia arranged them facing each other in the basement. A room with no windows, perfect for blocking out the outside light. The candle was placed in the middle, right at my feet. Olivia stood behind me, recording a video while muttering something, likely a chant or incantation she found online. I, like an idiot, stood between the two mirrors, and I asked just as instructed, "Is there someone behind me?" Silence. I felt stupid, almost ready to laugh. I was about to turn around when I saw myself smiling in the mirror. Not a small smile, but a grin that stretched from ear to ear, grotesque and unsettling. The terrifying part was I wasn't smiling. I immediately turned around. Olivia was standing there, her eyes wide open, the phone falling to the floor. She whispered, "Daniel, I see you, but it's not you." I couldn't bring myself to look at the mirror again. I reached for the light switch, but it wouldn't work. The basement was immersed in the flickering light of the candle that was about to go out. The sound from the mirror, from within the mirror, there was a faint laugh. Very soft, like it was coming from a faraway place. But I was sure I heard it. Not just me. Olivia heard it too. She stepped back, her hand shaking. I grabbed the mirror on the right, planning to turn it away to break the reflection. But when I touched it, the surface was freezing cold. Colder than anything I had ever felt. As soon as I turned the mirror, Olivia screamed. I turned back and saw her face go pale, eyes fixed on the space between the two mirrors. It's still there. Even after you turn the mirror away, it's still smiling. And now, it's looking at me. I screamed and dragged Olivia out of the basement. The wooden door slammed shut behind us, as though someone from the inside had pushed it. We both ran upstairs and collapsed on the kitchen floor, panting. I was about to call the police, but Olivia stopped me. "No one will believe us. They'll think we're delusional. But there's a way. We have to close the gate before it comes out." I never believed in these kinds of things. But now, seeing it with my own eyes, hearing it with my own ears, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. Returning to the basement, 3 days later, things in the house began to feel off. The hallway mirror kept falling off its hook, even though it had been nailed in multiple times. Olivia started talking to herself late at night, having one-sided conversations. And I often found myself looking in the mirror and seeing myself looking in the opposite direction. I decided to return to the basement, not to play, but to end it. I reread all the instructions Olivia had written down in her notebook. To close the mirror gate, both mirrors must face the wall, light a black candle in the middle, and reverse the opening chant. Do not look into the mirrors during the process. I did as instructed, my heart pounding. As soon as I began reciting the chant, there was a thud from inside the mirror, like someone was trapped behind the glass. A whisper echoed, "I want to get out." For some reason, my hand trembled so much that I nearly dropped the candle. I tried to stay calm and finished reading the last line. Just then, the candle went out. Everything became silent. But before I left the basement, I accidentally glanced at the mirror that was facing the wall, and I saw an eye staring back at me. In the end, we moved out of Aunt Lucy's house just 2 weeks later. No one in the family wanted to talk about what happened, simply calling it a stupid game that freaked the kids out. But I know, Olivia knows, and I believe something escaped, or worse, something is still waiting. As long as someone sets up two mirrors facing each other, stands between them, and asks, "Is there someone behind me?" it will smile, and you will never smile again. I once thought everything ended after the night we sealed the mirror gate. But some things, once awakened, are not easily put back to sleep. Olivia began to change just a few days after we left Grantville. At that time, our family moved into my grandparents' apartment in Salem, a larger city, brighter, and seemingly safer. But the urban lights couldn't chase away something that had latched onto Olivia. The silence begins. Olivia was almost completely silent during the first week. No phone calls, no social media. She didn't respond to anyone, not even me. She just sat in front of the mirror in my grandparents' room for hours, with a small notebook on her lap and a red pen. I secretly peeked through the door once, and what I saw made my spine shiver. She wasn't looking at herself in the mirror. She was smiling at something. Outside the frame of reflection, the red blood notebook I stole Olivia's notebook when she went to take a shower. The first few pages were just scribbles, with repeating symbols. Eyes, a smile slashed across her face, two mirrors facing each other, and the figure of a person standing between them, faceless. The middle pages had scribbled words as if written in a rush under a state of high agitation. The door is not closed, just locked temporarily. Every time I look in the mirror, it knows where I am. Every time it smiles, it takes a little more of my soul so it can smile more genuinely. And the last line, the one that nearly made me drop the notebook. On the 7th night, the door will open by itself, and I must choose. Let it in or walk out. The 7th night, no matter how foolish it seemed, I couldn't ignore that warning. I knocked on Olivia's door that very Saturday night since we had moved. No answer. The door wasn't locked. I gently pushed it open, and the first thing I saw was the large mirror covered by a black cloth. But it didn't cover it entirely. A small corner was left uncovered, and I saw Olivia's eyes in it, looking at me. No, more accurately, a pair of empty eyes staring right through me. Olivia sat there, motionless, holding a black candle. I whispered, "Olivia, what's going on?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and wrote with her finger on the dust-covered glass, "Don't turn your back." I didn't understand. Until the lights in the room suddenly went out. On the other side of the mirror, there were footsteps, but not from the hallway. They echoed from inside the mirror. Click! I turned around and saw the black cloth fall to the ground. And in the mirror, Olivia was standing. But she wasn't sitting in the chair like she really was. She was standing, tilting her head and smiling. I couldn't tell if I was looking at the real Olivia. Then the Olivia in the mirror raised her hand and pointed directly at me. And at the edge of the mirror, I saw a crack appear. Not a crack in the glass, but a small door. It didn't exist in the real world, but in the mirror, I saw a dark old door slightly ajar. And from inside it, a bony hand began to creep out. My grandfather appears. Fortunately, just then, my grandfather, a former soldier, entered the room after hearing the noise. He shouted and turned on all the lights. In an instant, everything disappeared. The mirror was just a mirror again. Olivia collapsed onto the floor, groaning. I can't hold on much longer. My grandfather hurriedly picked Olivia up, whispering something in Old German. I didn't understand, but his eyes, the eyes of someone who had seen war, were now full of fear, a tale from the past. After that night, my grandfather called me down to his private room. He told me that when he was young, he had participated in a military investigation at an old asylum in Poland. There, a child was found to have the ability to create mirror cracks, a supernatural phenomenon that allowed unidentified entities to mimic humans and step into the real world. Every time someone smiles in the mirror, but not in real life, it's because it has learned how to disguise its face. But if it learns how to step out, the real person must take its place in the mirror. I turned pale. Olivia had stood between two mirrors. She'd smiled in the mirror, and now she was being pulled away little by little. The final solution, my grandfather handed me an old mirror with silver frame, engraved with Latin on the back, Speculum Custodia, the sealed mirror. It could only be used once to trap the entity in the mirror if it had already started to invade. But to use it, someone has to stand in front of it and smile sincerely. I immediately understood. It had to be me. I was the one who started this game. I asked the fateful question, is there someone behind me? Now, I had to be the one to finish it. Back to the old basement. We returned to Grantville the next morning. The house had been abandoned, but the basement remained intact. The two mirrors were still there, though covered in dust and cobwebs. I placed the sealed mirror between them. And this time, I smiled. Not fake, not afraid. A smile of someone who knew they wouldn't have peace after today. Immediately, the mirror began to shake. Inside, Daniel was screaming, a pair of hands, a face, and finally, the entire body was sucked into the sealed mirror. Olivia screamed behind me, "Seal it!" I turned the mirror round, reciting the final incantation my grandfather had given me. The mirror's surface turned gray and cloudy. And then, silence. We left the house while the fog still lingered. Olivia no longer smiled in front of the mirror, but her gaze, occasionally, still flicked toward the mirrors in the house as if searching for a sign. But you know what? The sealed mirror my grandfather gave me. It disappeared the next morning. Someone took it, or someone inside had found a way to step out. I returned to campus in January the following year. The snow had piled up thickly across the entrance to the dome, the bushes covered in white, and the cold air was so sharp, it felt like every breath could freeze my lungs. I thought that leaving the old house behind, leaving Olivia, would help me forget what had happened. But in reality, I was just stepping into a new chapter, darker and more tangled than before. My new dorm was called Barrow Hall, an old building from the 1960s, with red-brown bricks, long, narrow hallways, and an inescapable smell of age that couldn't be scrubbed away. I was assigned to the third floor, which was rumored to be the floor most likely to lose power unexpectedly. I didn't care about that back then. I just needed a place to study in peace and keep a distance from what had followed me for the past 6 months. But peace was the last thing I found. The stolen reflection. One night in early February, I was walking down the hallway to the communal bathroom when I suddenly stopped. In the large mirror hanging at the end of the hall, something that had always unsettled me since I moved in. I didn't see my reflection. At first, I thought it was just the weak lighting. I raised my hand to wave. Nothing. The mirror reflected the hallway, the door behind me, even the clock on the wall. But not me. I stepped closer, just inches from the glass. No reflection. I panicked and stumbled back, almost losing my footing. As I turned to run, I suddenly noticed, in the mirror, a door was slightly ajar behind me, though there was no door in that spot in the hallway. I froze. The missing floormate. The next day, I told Colin, an upperclassman from my floor, always wearing headphones and gaming all night in the room next door. I hoped he would laugh at me and say something like, "You've been staying up too late." But Colin didn't laugh. His face went pale. "You saw that too?" 3 days ago, I looked into the mirror in the men's bathroom. I saw myself looking down, though I was standing up straight. In reality, when I turned away, someone knocked on the mirror from the inside. Colin said that after that, he stopped using the mirror altogether, only adjusting his hair with his phone's camera. But 2 days later, Colin disappeared. No one knew where he went. His door was locked from the inside, but the mirror in the bathroom, where he last looked, was removed from the wall, face down on the floor, and the back of it had scratches, as if something had clawed at it from behind the glass. The reflectionless people. From that day on, I began to notice something. There were people in the dorm who never looked into mirrors. They walked quickly past any reflective surfaces. Some stuck stickers on the mirrors in their rooms. Others covered them with blankets or towels. One night, I secretly followed a girl named Megan, my classmate in social psychology. She had the habit of stepping out to the balcony to smoke at 2 a.m. That night, the light from my room spilled onto the balcony window, and while she was standing there, the reflection behind her was empty. Megan had no reflection. I leaned back, my heart racing, and just then, Megan turned her head, looking straight at me, as if she knew I was watching. But her eyes, empty, without pupils. The sealed mirror. I wasn't sure if everything was connected until I received an anonymous package one rainy afternoon. Inside the box was a small silver mirror. So well of the sealing mirror that I had used with my uncle to lock the entity in the Grantville basement. The back of the mirror no longer had the words Speculum Custodia. Instead, there were scratch marks, as if someone had tried to open it from the inside. Along with it was a small note, written in a shaky hand. "It's not over. It's just been moved to a place with more mirrors. The dormitory is the perfect place. Don't trust anyone without a reflection. I almost dropped the mirror. The glass suddenly darkened, and for a moment, I saw Olivia's face, covered in blood, whispering something I couldn't hear. The solo investigation. I began noting every mirror in the building. The men's and women's bathrooms, hallways, elevators, windows, any reflective surface. I made a small map, marking the places with distorted reflections. Gradually, I discovered a repeating pattern. The missing people, like Colin, had all passed by at least 3 mirrors within 24 hours before disappearing. And at each last place they appeared, the mirror showed signs of being scratched, cracked, or faint bloodstains. I tried warning the others, but no one believed me until Megan disappeared the following week. Megan left a recording. The last thing she did was send me an audio recording via email. Her voice was faint, as if she were running. I saw myself in the mirror, but it wasn't me. It wore clothes like mine, moved just a few seconds after me. But when I closed my eyes, I heard laughing. And when I opened my eyes, it was closer. I don't know who the original is anymore, Daniel. If I don't come back, don't trust any copy. The midnight call. That night my phone rang at 3:11 a.m. The number wasn't in my contacts. I picked up. Daniel. It was Megan's voice. I'm back. Open the door for me. I froze. Meanwhile, an email from the school arrived. The body of student Megan N. was found this morning in the water tank behind the dormitory. At the same time, I heard a soft knock on the mirror in my room. I didn't dare turn around. I had gotten used to sleepless nights. But that night, the night Megan called from the unnamed number, the night her body was found beneath the thin ice behind the dormitory, I didn't just lose sleep. I lost my belief that there was anything in this world that could still be called real. My phone rang again at 4:07 a.m. Still from the unnamed number, still that voice. Daniel, I saw you in the mirror, but why can't you see me? I turned the phone off, not because I was scared, but because that voice, it sounded like Megan, but it wasn't Megan. Something was wrong. It was as if someone was mimicking her voice, but hadn't yet learned the rhythm of a human being. I turned the mirror to face the wall, and I realized it was time to stop running. The clue from the underground library. The next morning, I went to the old library at the school, a place almost no one visited because it had decayed and become damp. But I remembered a senior once telling me that the basement of the library used to be where they stored forbidden materials, records of expelled students, unreported serious incidents, and even reports on paranormal activities. I sneaked in through the back stairs, using an old student ID to break the lock. The basement was pitch dark, and only the light from my phone's flashlight guided me. The walls were damp with moss, and the smell of rotting paper and mildew filled the air. I found a box of files wrapped in black plastic, labeled 1973-1985 special cases. Among them was a file that made my blood run cold. Club Reflectorium. It was a secret student group active from 1978 to 1983. They called themselves Reflectorium, roughly translated as the Reflectors. They weren't just a group of kids messing around with spells. This was a serious research group with documentation, structure, and rules. Their main goal: to study anomalous reflection phenomena, particularly the echo entity, understood as a being reflected from the mirror One page in the handwritten documents recorded a ritual called Crux Speculi, an experiment using double mirrors to summon a reflective entity. Beneath it, in red ink, was a warning. Never allow the person performing the ritual to see themselves smile in the mirror. If that happens, the entity will leave a mark in the mirror, begin to mimic movement, expressions, and eventually synchronize. In 1983, the final year of the group's activities, all 7 members disappeared, leaving behind a cracked mirror with a scribbled message on the back. One of us smiled. The survivor, I found the name of one person who had been in the group. Liam Booker, a former philosophy student. Unlike the other 6, Liam dropped out before the final ritual took place. According to the old records, he now lived in a nursing home in southern Oregon. I drove there the next day. Liam was an old man, bald, in a wheelchair, his cloudy eyes still holding a strange wariness. When I mentioned the word reflectorium, his face went pale. You've heard the laugh in the mirror, haven't you? I nodded. Liam began to speak. The ritual destroyed. In 1983, they performed the final ritual in an old psychology lab that has since been demolished. That night, a member named Claire smiled in the mirror, thinking the game had failed. And from then on, it knew each of our names. It appeared in the bathroom mirror, in the windows late at night, mimicking voices, expressions, memories. It even faked the pain. Liam ran away shortly after, never daring to bring a mirror, glasses, or any reflective surface with him. It doesn't need you to open the gate anymore, Daniel. It just needs someone to believe they're seeing a loved one. And then they invited in. The dormitory locked down. When I returned, the police were sealing off Barrow Hall. A freshman had jumped from the 3rd floor after seeing themselves waving from the bathroom mirror. They didn't find the body, only shattered glass, and in the fragments, still reflecting, the feet. I knew I didn't have much time left. It was spreading. Every time someone sees themselves in the mirror and doubts it, it takes one more step closer to the real world. Olivia called back that night. I received a text from Olivia. It had been almost 2 months since I last saw her. Daniel, they're watching you. It's not in the mirror anymore. It's learned how to step out. At the same moment, in the mirror of my room, the small mirror I had once turned to face the wall, images of me began to appear, but not me. It wore clothes like mine, with the same birthmark on its neck, but it was reading a book I had never seen before. Then it looked up and smiled at me. The final choice. I realized there was only one way to stop it. Destroy all the mirrors where it had been summoned. But I needed one thing. The original mirror from the 1983 ritual. The place where it was first called. Liam told me he still had a shot of it. And if I wanted to end this, I had to use it as a reverse wound, leading the entity back to where it started, and then sealing it with a real reflection. But remember, Liam whispered, never look at it too long, because when you see it clearly, it will see you clearly too. Story 9. Name into Hell. The Death Game. I never believed in spirit summoning, curses, or those occult rituals that circulate on the internet. How could I? I grew up in the small town of Claremont, New Hampshire, where everyone knew each other by name, and creepy stories were just meant to scare kids into going to bed on time. Until I found the doll. My name is Riley Hartman. I'm 17 years old, a senior in high school. My mother passed away when I was young, and my dad, he never really came back after that. He lived like a ghost, coming home from work, slamming his room door shut without a word. Everything stayed that way until last summer, when I started getting curious about my mother's past. I rummaged through old boxes in the basement, boxes my dad had strictly forbidden me to touch, and I found it. A small doll, made of fabric that had yellowed over time, but still recognizable in shape. Its brown hair was tangled, the stitched black eyes empty and lifeless, and the strangest thing, a tear across its belly, sewn back up with red thread. Next to it was a small rotting piece of paper with the words written in brown red ink. Write your name, place it inside, sew it up with blood thread, soak in salt water. Stick a needle through the heart, hide in the dark. Do not leave until the footsteps fade away. I laughed out loud. It was clearly a prank, probably something my mother did when she was younger. But that night, in the suffocating silence of the house, I couldn't resist the urge to try. 11:34 p.m. I took a piece of paper, wrote my name, Riley Hartman, in red ink, and stuffed it inside the doll's belly after unsewing the thread. I didn't have any blood thread, so I used old red thread, carefully pushing a needle through the thin fabric, stitching it back up as the instructions said. Then I soaked it in the salt water I had prepared in the sink. The doll floated, staring at me as if waiting. I took the largest sewing needle in my mother's sewing kit and slowly pushed it directly into the spot where the heart should be, or where I guessed the heart was. The needle didn't veer off course as if it were puncturing something that was already prepared to be pierced. A chill ran down my spine. A gust of wind blew through, even though the windows were closed tight. The air in the house shifted immediately, heavy, suffocating, like someone had just entered, though I couldn't see them. I turned on the flashlight, crawled into the closet, and shut the door. The space smelled musty and of rotting wood. My heart began to race, but I still smiled. It was just a game. And then I heard it. Thud, thud, thud. Footsteps. At first they were faint, but they grew louder, echoing from the end of the hallway, like bare feet stepping on old wooden floors, slowly dragging. I froze. It couldn't be my dad. He always slept like the dead, snoring like a chainsaw. And this person was walking in the opposite direction, from my room back toward the closet. Thud, thud. A whisper came, close to my ear, as if it were coming from inside the wood. Raleigh. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. In the darkness of the closet, I could clearly feel someone standing right outside the door. The cold sensation crawled up my spine, my skin tightening, as though my soul was being stretched out of my body. Click, the doorknob rattled lightly. I closed my eyes. I didn't dare breathe. Then it stopped. No more footsteps, no more breathing, no more whispers. Just silence. It lasted like a threat. I don't remember how long I was in that closet. Maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour. When I couldn't take it anymore, I slowly opened the door. The room was pitch dark. The flashlight had turned off at some point. I cautiously stepped out. No one. No sign of anything strange, except the doll. It was no longer in the sink. I found it lying on my bed, soaked, the needle still embedded in its heart. But the horrifying thing was, the piece of paper with my name was no longer inside. Instead, there was a red line, as though written in blood, stitched across the doll's belly. Next time, don't hide. I couldn't sleep. I tried throwing the doll in the trash, burning it in the backyard. But every morning, when I woke up, it was back in my room, clean, dry, and whole. I started hearing footsteps every night. The feeling of someone watching me through the darkness. Faint images in the mirror. A face with no eyes, no mouth, appearing behind me and disappearing in the blink of an eye. I told Max, my only close friend at school, and he thought I had a sleep disorder. But when Max slept over at my house one Friday night, he also heard the footsteps. We both hid in the closet, his hand tightly gripping mine, his eyes wide open. "There's something out there," Max whispered. "Riley, you called it." And I knew from that moment that this was no longer a game. The next night, Max disappeared. The police found his phone crushed in my house, but there was no sign of a break-in. No blood, no footprints. Only one thing left behind. The doll and a piece of paper sewn into its hand. One name for one soul. And this time, the needle wasn't in the doll's heart anymore. It was on my pillow, covered in fresh blood. I don't know how to begin this story without making people think I've gone mad. But if you've ever seen a close friend disappear in their own house, leaving behind a blood-soaked needle on the pillow, you'll understand how it feels. I tried to tell the police. They didn't believe me. Of course, they didn't believe me. The whole school was shaken by Max's disappearance. But after a few days, everything started to settle down, like every other tragedy. People whispered behind my back, saying I knew something. I didn't deny it. I did. But I couldn't prove it. I had written my name on a piece of paper, placed it inside an old cloth doll, followed a crazy ritual, and now my best friend was gone. Everything felt absurd, but I couldn't deny what was happening right in front of me. The doll was still there, always lying in the same spot on my bed every day. Every morning I threw it away, but every night it returned, dry and clean, like someone had been taking care of it carefully. But what was more terrifying was that each time it returned, it had one new detail. The first night, the needle was gone. The second night, a single tear embroidered on its face with black thread. The third night, it wore an old lace dress I was sure wasn't there before. The fourth night, its mouth was slightly open, with threads unraveling like it was sneering. I started having the same dreams, standing in the middle of a white room with no ceiling, no walls, no floor. And in the center of the room was Max, but not Max. His face was distorted, his eyes all white, and his voice came out like it was from the mouth of a puppet. "There's one more, then it's your turn." I decided to seek the truth. I went back to the basement where I had found the doll. I searched through every box, flipping through old files and photo albums. And then I found something my mother had kept hidden. A small old notebook, leather cover, no title. The first page was written in sharp, cold handwriting. The Needle Doll Ritual. Original, Hickory Grove. The journal began with the account of a woman named Eliza Hartman, a name just like my mother's. She wrote about an ancient ritual originating from Japan, twisted and brought to America by a cult of occultists in the early 20th century. The ritual required the performer to write their name, or someone else's, on a doll, sew it shut, soak it in salt water, then stab a needle into its heart. Afterward, they were to flee from its sight. If done correctly, the doll would become a host, holding the identity and soul of the person whose name was written becoming a portal for another entity to cross over. I quickly flipped through the following pages, my skin crawling the more I read. Eliza had performed the ritual, and the person who disappeared afterward was her first husband. "It doesn't stop when we stop the game," she wrote. "It finds the next one, and the next. As long as someone reads these words, the doll will never stop." I took the notebook to someone I trusted, Miss Quill, my history teacher. She had been an anthropology lecturer at the University of Vermont before moving to teach in Claremont. She looked at me with a serious expression when I showed her the doll. "Riley," she said after a long silence, "do you know what this is?" I nodded. "It's what took Max." She remained silent. Then she took a small box from her cupboard, inside which were some paper talismans, a small jar of salt, and an old black and white photo. I froze. The photo was of a young woman with brown hair, holding a doll just like mine. Standing beside her was another woman, my mother, Eliza Hartman. This photo was sent to me by an old friend of mine. She studied Eastern occult rituals. The girl in the photo was one of the first victims of this ritual in America. She disappeared from her dorm room in 1982. As for your mother, why did she keep the doll? I asked, my throat tight. Miss Quill looked at me, sadly. Maybe she thought she could keep it safe. Maybe she thought that if no one used it, it would have no power. But I had used it, and now it had awakened. That night I decided to end everything. I took the doll to the backyard, buried it deep in the ground, sprinkled salt around the area, and placed my mother's notebook and a piece of paper with my name on top. I burned everything. The flames flared wildly, unusually high, then died down in an instant as if someone had smothered them. I thought I was done. But when I returned to my room, I found something even worse. A new doll, pristine white, one I had never seen before, was lying on my bed. No thread, no needle, only a small card beside it. The next person will choose. Write a name, or die with us. I never thought there would come a day when I'd be sitting in my bedroom, hands trembling, holding a pen, facing a pristine, clean doll, as if it had just been sewn from a toy store, except for the eyes. It had no real eyes, just two black thread marks in the shape of circles. And yet I felt like I was being watched. As if within that fabric, a creature was awakening, smiling, waiting. On the card that came with it, the red blood-colored words still danced before my eyes. Write a name, or die with us. The words were simple, neat, full of choice. But in reality, there was no choice at all. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't write any names. I just sat there, staring at the doll as if it might move at any moment. And honestly, at times, I thought it did. At 2:47 a.m., I clearly saw its head tilt slightly to the left. At 3:21, its right hand moved slightly toward me. And by 4 a.m., its mouth opened. Not because the stitches had come undone, but as if it was breathing. I turned on the light, took a needle from the drawer, the old needle that had once been stained with Max's blood, and drove it straight into its heart as a warning. But the doll just lay there, silent, waiting. The next morning, I went to Miss Quill's house. I needed advice, or at least someone to witness what was happening to me. She wasn't home. The door was wide open, showing signs of being forced. In the kitchen, water was overflowing from the faucet. The kettle was still boiling on the stove, smoke pouring out. Everything looked as if she had just stepped out for a moment, but never returned. I called the police. They came, investigated, and then shook their heads. An old woman living alone, the officer said. She could have lost her memory, wandered off somewhere, or someone might have lured her away. I looked at him, wanting to scream. She didn't go anywhere. She's been taken. But how do you explain that what's taking people's lives is a walking doll? I returned home and decided to break the rules. I placed the doll on the dining table, spread salt around it, and lit candles as instructed in my mother's old notebook. Fortunately, I kept a copy before burning the original. After pulling the needle from its heart, I placed a blank sheet of paper and a red pen in front of it. "Write your name," I said, "if you really exist." And I waited. An hour passed. 2 hours. I was about to give up when I felt a sharp sting on the tip of my finger. It was as if someone had just cut a small line. Blood began to seep out, dripping onto the table. I pulled back in panic. The doll had moved. It lay slightly tilted, its right hand almost touching the pen. And then, right before my eyes, the words slowly appeared on the blank paper, as if an invisible hand was writing. Riley Hartman. I screamed, tore the paper up, and threw it into the kitchen to burn. But when the paper burned, another piece appeared on the table, with the same handwriting, the same name. I screamed, cried, threw the doll against the wall, but it just bounced back, fell to the floor, and crawled toward me. I ran out, leaving the door wide open, and rushed to the one person I never thought would help me. My father. I hadn't entered his room in years. He sat there, in front of the TV watching soccer, holding his 4th beer. I gasped, interrupting the game. "I need help. The doll. It's haunting me. It took Max. Now it's after Miss Quill." He glanced at me, his eyes empty. But something changed when I mentioned the doll. "You said a doll?" he asked slowly. I nodded. "Mom kept it. You knew, didn't you?" He stood up silent and walked straight into the shed behind the kitchen. I followed him. In the darkness, he pulled out an old wooden box and opened it. Inside were a series of scribbled drawings, pieces of paper with people's names, and a familiar object. A doll, exactly like the one I had. But it was burned halfway, its fabric singed, and one eye missing. I stared at him, stunned. "Your mom did that ritual with me," he said, his voice flat. "Not to kill me, but to save you." I didn't understand. I was seriously ill when I was a kid. The doctor said I wouldn't make it. Your mom tried everything one night. She did the ritual, wrote her name on the doll. And the next morning, I woke up. Your mom was never the same. He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. She gave up her soul, but the doll was never enough. It came back. Always comes back. That's when I realized I wasn't the first, not the only one. But this time, it didn't want just one name. It wanted more. I returned home just before midnight, and I saw it. The new doll was lying on the table. Beside it was a list of over 10 names. My friends, teachers, even my father. I trembled as I read the last line. One name, one day. No name, no escape. Choose Riley Hartman. Story 10. Write a wish in blood. I first heard about the game from a stranger on a night train to Oregon. At the time, I was sitting by the window, watching the rows of pine trees receding behind me like faceless ghosts. The woman across from me wrinkled skin, wearing a worn olive green sweater, suddenly spoke after nearly an hour of complete silence. "Have you ever heard of the game where you write a wish in blood?" I turned toward her, intending to brush it off with a chuckle, but her eyes, dull, lifeless like the eyes of a dead fish, made me stop. I shook my head. "You write a wish on paper, using your own blood, then place it under your pillow. If, when you wake up the next morning, the paper is gone, your wish will come true." "And what's the price that it come?" I asked, just to be polite. She didn't answer immediately. She only chuckled softly, a dry, rusty laugh, like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. "The truth," she said, "is that everyone who plays regrets it." I was about to ask more, but when I looked back, she was no longer there. The seat was empty. No suitcase, no luggage, no trace left that she had ever existed on that night train. 3 weeks later, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Eugene. I was a senior psychology student, and the pile of research materials and assignments almost drove me mad. I started having unclear dreams, long corridors without windows, someone crying from within the walls, and blood-written words appearing on the ceiling. One night, while sorting through an old box of books from my parents' house, I found a small notebook I didn't remember owning. The dark brown leather cover had no title except for a blood drop symbol etched in the bottom corner. Inside, there was only one handwritten page. "Write your wish in blood, fold the paper in half, place it under your pillow. Never expect it to remain there by morning." I shuddered, but I couldn't stop staring at those words. Something was pulling me in. I tried it one rainy night. No moonlight. Only the howling wind and branches scraping the window like claws. I used a small knife to lightly cut the tip of my finger. Blood seeped out. I wrote, "I wish for a full scholarship for a PhD program at Yale." I folded the paper in half, shoved it under my pillow, then climbed into bed, trying not to think about what I had just done. I didn't dream that night. No images, no sounds. The next morning, the paper was gone. 3 days later, I received an email confirming my full scholarship, including living expenses, to Yale. I thought I would be overjoyed, ecstatic, or at least eagerly calling my mom. But no. Since receiving that email, I only felt cold. Not the cold from the wind, but a cold deep in my bones, as if my blood was flowing backward. I began having nightmares. Not random dreams like before. Now it was like a twisted horror movie, looping every night. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. Every night. 3 knocks on the left wall, then 3 knocks on the floor, and finally a voice whispering in my ear, "Wish again." I moved rooms, to the living room, to the couch. But no matter where I slept, the sound persisted, regularly, like a death clock. I told my best friend Megan about it. She didn't believe me, of course, but after spending a night at my place, she started acting strangely. The next day, Megan didn't say a word. She just stared at me during breakfast. When I asked what was wrong, she answered with just one sentence. "Someone was standing at the foot of your bed all night." That evening, Megan went home and disappeared. The police found her car parked in an empty lot near the edge of the woods. The car doors were locked. Her phone was still in the trunk. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing. Like Megan had vanished from the world. A few days later, I dreamt of her. She was standing at the end of a hallway. Her eyes were completely white. Blood dripped from her mouth. She held a crumpled piece of paper, just like the one I'd written on. I began to investigate. I searched the dark web, occult forums, Reddit, anywhere I could. And I discovered this game was real. It had existed for a long time. Dozens, hundreds of people had written their wishes, and all of them either disappeared or went insane. One anonymous user on the Occult Pathway forum wrote, "I wish to see my daughter again after she died in an accident. I saw her that night. It was really her, but she had no face. I don't know what to do next." I tried burning all the remaining papers. I prayed. I went to church, but nothing changed. Last night, while looking in the mirror, I realized something horrifying. I no longer had a reflection. It was just a dark void, like my body was slowly being replaced by something else. And I'm scared. Scared that this game doesn't just stop at one wish. It demands more. Tonight, the whispers have changed their words. It's no longer wish again. Now, it's someone else's turn now. I no longer know if I'm awake or dreaming. Since that night, the night the whispers changed their words, everything around me began to crack, not in a loud, obvious way, but quietly, like tiny cracks in glass. They spread gradually, day by day, until I could no longer recognize reality. The lights in my apartment flicker on and off, even though I've replaced the fuse. The clock always stops at 2:47 a.m. And the worst part, I began to see people who shouldn't exist. That night, I did something I never thought I would. I called my grandmother, the only one in the family ever called superstitious. She lived in the southern suburbs of Missouri, where beliefs blend Catholicism with ancient rituals that are only whispered about during harvest festivals. "I've opened the door," her voice rasped, colder than I expected. "Now, there are two choices. Close it, or lead someone else through to take its place." I was speechless. "What do you mean?" "The demon of the wish doesn't come for free," she said. "It gives you what you want. But to keep that wish, you must pay a price. Not with blood, but with the soul of another." I remembered the last words from the dream. It's someone else's turn now, and I understood. I had to pass it on, like a curse that could spread. I didn't want to, but the nightmares kept getting worse. Not just when I slept, but even while awake. I saw Megan. Even though she had been missing for over 2 weeks, she sat by my bed every night, her face bruised, holding a torn piece of paper stained with blood. She didn't say anything. She just staring, as if asking, "Why didn't you warn me?" I decided to meet with Casey, a former classmate who was interested in the occult and ancient rituals. I had never been close to her, but now I needed anyone who understood this better than I did. We met at a small cafe tucked away in the art district of Eugene. Casey had changed. She was thinner, her eyes were sunken, and she spoke in whispers as if being watched. When I told her about the game, she didn't seem surprised. "Someone reached out to me about that," Casey said. "An anthropology student. He wrote a wish and never came back to class. But before that, he said something I can't forget." I leaned forward. "What did he say?" Casey swallowed hard. "I'm not me anymore. We decided to visit the old apartment of that student, Brandon Lawrence, located in a rundown building on the east side of the city. The landlord said he had left in the middle of the night without a word, leaving everything behind. As soon as we entered the room, I felt the air grow heavy like lead. The musty smell mixed with something foul. There was a mirror hanging on the wall, but what it reflected was not us. In the mirror, Casey and I stood there, but our eyes were pitch black, our mouths stretched wide to the ears, and we were whispering something. I stepped back from the mirror, trembling. Casey opened the closet, and we found a stack of papers. Each one was stained with dried blood, each with a different wish. I want her to love me. I want my father to die. I want to win the lottery. On the last piece of paper, there was no wish, only a scrawled note in blood. Don't believe what it gives. It only borrows souls. That night I stayed awake. I began seeing them in my house. People with familiar faces but with eyes lacking sclera. They smiled. They repeated their wishes like a broken tape recorder. I want to live forever. I never want to be alone. I want revenge. And then they screamed. They writhed. They caught fire. Vanished in the sound of suffocating moans. Casey called me the next day. Her voice was trembling, broken. I think I made a wish, just to try it. A small one. What did you wish for? I wished for you to be safe. I froze. Casey had taken my place as the next wish bearer. That night, I went to Casey's apartment, but it was pitch dark. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. When I pushed the door open, it was freezing cold inside. In the living room, a large blood stain spread in the shape of a circle across the floor. In the center, there was a blood-stained piece of paper. It's my turn now. For the first time, I cried. Not out of fear, but out of guilt. Everyone had fallen into this spiral because of me. I thought I could escape, but I couldn't. That night in my dream, I stood in the middle of a forest. In front of me was a crossroad. Each path had a person waiting. Megan, Brandon, Casey, none of them were human anymore. They were twisted souls, cursed, trapped in a loop of blood and darkness. And they all spoke the same sentence, echoing in my head like a war drum. The last one will have to rewrite the game. When I woke up, a blank sheet of paper lay on the table. A small dagger was placed right beside it. No one forced me. No whispers, no shadows. Only the heavy silence and the choice. Rewrite or let it end with me. I sat before the blank sheet of paper for 3 hours, too fearful to touch it. The wall clock remained frozen at its usual spot. 2:47 a.m. My room no longer felt like a refuge. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in tighter each time I looked away, as if attempting to suffocate me. Even the light from the lamp dimmed unnaturally, yielding to creeping shadows that silently slithered across the floor, trailing my every step. Sleep eluded me. Eating was a chore. Reaching out to others proved futile. Those I tried to contact claimed my number no longer exists. It was as if both I and this apartment were being erased from existence. There I sat, staring at the blank paper. No words, no bloodstains. Yet, I knew that writing on it, making a wish, would perpetuate the cycle. Another soul would be ensnared. Another would be torn apart in the night, and I would be freed. Or perhaps not, like Casey, who tried to save me with her own life. Now she too was but a wandering spirit in the dreams of the living. I recalled my grandmother's words. You can close the door, but you must go to the root. The root? The origin of what? I scoured ancient libraries, delved into esoteric forums, but no one knew the true source of this game. All I found were rumors, fragmented whispers, dried bloodstains no one dared to cleanse. Then, Casey's story came back to me, about Brandon, the student with countless wishes written in blood, and the final note: "Don't believe it. It only borrows your soul." I began to understand. This game was more than a mere exchange. It was a covert summoning ritual, disguised under the guise of human desperation. Each wish penned was an invitation, a gateway for some entity from beyond to enter. I had to trace it back to its roots. All I had was the old leather notebook I once found. The one with the blood droplet symbol etched on its corner. I took it to an old occult bookstore named Black Sigil on the outskirts of Ashland. Inside, the dimly lit shop smelled of damp wood and burnt incense. An elderly man with cloudy eyes recognized the symbol immediately. "This isn't a book," he whispered. "It's a seal." "A seal of what?" I croaked, my voice hoarse from sleeplessness. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the notebook on the wooden counter, flipping it open to the first page. A page I had never dared to turn. There, drawn in dried blood, was an image. A faceless, towering figure with arms that touched the ground, eyes replaced by bleeding spirals. Below the drawing, a Latin inscription. Thankfully, the man could translate. "You will not see its face, but it always watches. You will not hear its voice, but it always whispers. And if you invite it a third time, you will become it." I returned home, but as I stepped through the door, I knew I was too late. The walls bore fresh, scrawled messages in crimson. Second time. Second time. Second time. I had only made one wish. But then I remembered. One wish written. One read aloud when the paper vanished. And now, as I reached to touch the blank sheet to write again, 3 times. I had opened all 3 doors. The lights went out. Not gradually, but with a sharp hiss, as if all the electricity had been drained. I stood in the darkness, hearing only breathing. But it wasn't mine. It was in the room. I froze, trying not to move, but the wooden floor creaked. Something circled me, lightly scraping the walls, like long fingernails. Then, in a moment of madness, I spun around, but saw nothing, only the mirror, and in it, me, but not me. The reflection had my face, but with hollow black eyes and a mouth split ear to ear. It stared and grinned. I don't recall what happened next. I only know I awoke in the forest, blood on my hands, the notebook beside me. On a new page, no wish, just a line. To end must begin anew. I understood. I couldn't stop the game, but I could rewrite its rules. I needed someone to read the new note, not to make a wish, but to end it. I placed the notebook in the university library, wedged between 2 old theology books. On the first page, I left this note. If you're reading this, you're not too late, but don't write anything. Burn the notebook. Burn it before it writes you.